The Boltons warred against the Starks for longer than most kingdoms in this world have existed. Twice they took Winterfell and burned it to the ground. They were besieged for 2 years straight, brought to their knees, stripped of their lands, and forced to give up their own sons as hostages. And every single time, the Dreadfort rose again. Entire houses that tried to do the same vanished without a trace. Yet the Boltons stood. And here is the strange part. A house that survived millennia of northern wars ended in a single generation. It ended completely, down to the last man. And it wasn't the Starks who finished them off.
We know the Boltons by their finale. Roose, with his cold, pale eyes, who smiles exactly once in his life, and even then in someone else's hall during a wedding. Ramsay, with his knife and his pack of dogs. The pink banners over Winterfell that lasted just over 2 years. It seems as though that is the entirety of House Bolton, a pair of psychopaths who briefly seized power and predictably perished. But these two stand at the very end of a very long line. Behind them are thousands of years of history, crowns, wars, rebellions, and treaties. And if you look at that entire line, the picture is not at all what the show portrayed. To piece it together, we have to go back to the Age of Heroes.
Let's start with a sigil, because the sigil here is more important than the motto. A flayed man, red on a pale pink field, splattered with drops of blood. Look at any other great house of Westeros, and you will see a beast or an element. A direwolf, a lion, a stag, a kraken, a rose, a dragon, a falcon, a sun. Houses choose sigils that reflect what they wish to be seen as: strength, nobility, fertility, fury. The Boltons did otherwise. They didn't choose a sigil of themselves. They chose a sigil of what they do to others. It is the only heraldry in Westeros that depicts the result of the house's work, not the predator, but the one who fell into the predator's clutches.
The house's official words sound almost boring against this backdrop. Our blades are sharp. According to Martin himself, that is indeed the motto. And in the text of the books, this phrase barely functions. It simply doesn't appear in the scenes. But another one does. The unofficial one, repeated by everyone who has ever had dealings with the Dreadfort. A naked man has few secrets. A flayed man, none. Roose repeats it as a working principle, and the servant nicknamed Reek recounts it to Theon as a family proverb. And this is no longer heraldry. This is a manual.
Now for the main point. The gesture for which the Boltons are known throughout the North is usually explained by sadism, and that is the laziest explanation possible. A sadist does not build a house that stands for thousands of years. A sadist burns out in a generation, just as Ramsay did. But the Boltons held on for an inexcusably long time for a house of their size, and they held on precisely because they turned terror into a functional tool. The Dreadfort stands in the east of the North, on the northern bank of the Weeping Water, and it never had the resources of Winterfell. Not as much land, not as many bannermen, not as much grain. Such a house cannot win every war.
That means it has only one strategy: to make it unprofitable to start a war against them. That is the DNA of House Bolton. Not cruelty for pleasure, but fear as currency. Terror used to pay the price instead of soldiers. One demonstratively destroyed enemy saves you from having to fight the next 10, because those next 10 have already heard what happens. This is not Martin's invention. This is how real empires of antiquity worked, and we will return to this. The Boltons simply took the principle to its logical limit and stitched it into their own heraldry, so that the reminder would hang on every banner. And their castle is exactly what a castle of a house with such a philosophy should be. The Dreadfort is entirely stone, with thick walls and massive towers, well supplied and adapted for long winters and long sieges. Tyrion, who has never seen it in his life, knows enough about it to describe it. A strong fortress, all stone, with plenty to eat during winter. Steep stairs lead down into dungeons with cold, damp walls. And somewhere down there, if rumors are to be believed, there is a room where the skins of the house's enemies hang, including those of several kings of the north. None of the living characters have seen this room. No one can confirm it, but everyone knows about it, from lords to nurses.
Роб Старк, взрослый мужчина и командир армии, признается, что каждый раз, когда смотрит на молчаливого руса, думает именно о той комнате. Брен узнал о ней от Олд Нан из «На ночь сказки».
Here is where the detail is hidden that will later decide the fate of the entire house, even though it looks like a trifle now. A rumor works better than a fact. As long as no one has checked, the enemy's imagination fills in the rest, and it fills it in more generously than any reality. But a rumor has one nasty property. It cannot be controlled. It lives its own life, grows, gathers details, and at some point it ceases to be the house's weapon and becomes the house's death warrant. The Boltons used this mechanism for thousands of years and never once considered that it was a double-edged sword.
This is what this house is made of. Fear, cast into a sigil, a castle, and a reputation. And now let's look at how this construction worked in practice, because for the first few thousand years, it brought the Boltons not just survival, but a crown.
A crown, quite literally. Before the North became a unified kingdom, it consisted of a dozen minor powers that gnawed at each other, and the Boltons were one of them. They were called the Red Kings of the Dreadfort, and their domains stretched from the Last River and the White Knife to the Ship's Head Hills. By the standards of the Age of Heroes, this is a vast territory. Winterfell had neighbors enough. The Marsh Kings, the Queens of the Wolf's Den, the Red Kings, various minor nobility. But in all the chronicles, one confrontation stands out. The most stubborn and most vicious enemy of the Kings of Winter was always the Dreadfort.
How long this confrontation lasted, no one can say for sure. In the show, Roose drops the line that if one believes the legends, his ancestors fought the Starks from the Long Night until the arrival of the Andals. The books are more cautious in their phrasing, but the overall picture is the same. The feud began shortly after the Long Night and lasted for millennia. These are not border skirmishes. This is a war that went on longer than writing has existed in our world.
And here is the main thing that is erased from the popular perception of the Boltons. They were winning. Not sometimes, not in small ways. King Royce Bolton, second of his name, took Winterfell and burned it. 3 centuries later, his descendant and namesake, Royce Force, did exactly the same thing. Twice, in 300 years, the heart of the North burned, and both times a Bolton held the torch. Royce IV entered the chronicles under the nickname Red Hand, and he earned that nickname for what he did to captives with his own hands. The details are not needed here. They are in the text, and they don't make things any better. What matters is something else. He didn't hide it. The nickname worked for him, just like the banner. It went ahead of the army. Further back in the past lies a story that is truly unsettling and one that maybe 1 in 20 viewers knows. Approximately 2,000 years ago, the Kings of Winter launched a brutal campaign against the Three Sisters, and the Chronicles of the Long Sister preserved a detail about Baltazar Bolton. He ordered a tent to be made for himself, a pink tent. The material for this tent was 100 captured sisters' men. I won't dwell on exactly how it was done, and not because I don't know, but because the point here isn't the process at all. The point is that Baltazar lived in that tent afterward. He slept. He received people. This is not a fit of rage after a battle.
It is calm, deliberate, long-term statement.
calculated so that people would still be talking about it 2,000 years later. And as you can see, the calculation worked.
From the same era grows a legend over which fans still break spears. According to rumors, some lords and red kings of the Boltons wore cloaks made from the skin of slain enemies, and among those enemies were Starks. The world of Ice and Fire mentions this as hearsay from the Age of Heroes, not as an established fact, and that is fundamental. They specifically named the son of Baal the Bard, the very singer who, according to Northern legend, led the daughter of a Lord Stark right out of Winterfell. Note how carefully Martin presents this, not as a chronicle, not as testimony, but as a story that is told.
House Bolton exists in the text half as reality and half as a scary fairy tale, and the second half always worked for the first. And since we've gone this deep, here's another detail for you. The world of Ice and Fire lists candidates for who the legendary Night's King might have been, that 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch who declared himself king. The list of versions includes Woodfoot, Amber, Flint, Nori, a Stark himself, and a Bolton. The Maesters don't know, no one knows, but the very stag that the Bolton name pops up on this list alongside the Starks says everything about the place the house held in Northern mythology. They were suspected of everything, which by the way is exactly what they were aiming for.
Just don't think that we are dealing with a house of obsessed killers who knew nothing but slaughter. That would be the second lazy version in a row. The Red Kings engaged in politics, and they did it quite well. It is known that some of them formed alliances with the Marsh Kings to fight off Southerners together. They knew how to sit at a table, negotiate, and trade their interests. A house that held lands from the Last River to the Sheep's Head Hills could not physically be governed by terror alone. Terror was the outer contour. Inside, standard feudal mechanics were at work.
And here appears the first crack, which no one would have noticed at the moment of its appearance. Remember this moment, it will return thousands of years later and cost the house everything. As long as the Boltons were kings, they had total control over their reputation. They decided when to frighten, whom to frighten, and how severely. Terror was their tool. It lay in their hand, and it was switched on and off at their will. But the longer such a tool works, the more stories it produces. And at some point, there are more stories than there are actions. Cloaks of Starkskin, a room in the dungeon, a pink tent, the Night's King. Half of this perhaps never happened at all.
But all of this now lives separately from the Dreadfort, and it no longer obeys the Dreadfort. This is what they were like at their peak, kings who twice burned the rival's capital and knew how to form alliances while doing so. They were feared more than anyone else in the north, and that fear replaced the armies they lacked. And that is exactly why what happened next looks so strange, that the first reaction is always the same. How could these people just give up?
Exactly. They just went and surrendered. The last Red King was named Rogar Bolton, known as the Hunter, and he submitted to Winterfell voluntarily. Not after a crushing defeat, not after the fall of the Dreadfort, and not under the threat of total annihilation. He bent the knee and, to boot, sent his own sons to the Kings of Winter as hostages. A house that had refused to acknowledge anyone as their superior for millennia folded its crown and gave up its children.
The reason lies in the timing. Rogar submitted at the very moment the Andals began to arrive in Westeros. And this is where the Boltons displayed the quality for which they deserve respect, even if everything else about them is repulsive. They knew how to calculate. The Andals were coming from the south in a massive wave, with a new god, new weapons, and absolutely no desire to negotiate with the local kings. The North could have met them as a fractured collection of squabbling states, and then it would have been devoured, just as the Riverlands, the Vale, and the Reach were. Or it could meet them united under one crown. Rogar did the math,
and realized that the second option left the Boltons a chance, while the first left them nothing.
Pay attention to what this decision lacks. It lacks pride entirely. Not a single attempt to die with dignity, not a single gesture in the style of a last stand. The Red Kings had spent 8 millennia posing as the embodiment of terror, but when it came down to it, they calmly traded their crown for the survival of their line. This, if you think about it, is perfectly consistent with their DNA. For the Boltons, fear was always a tool, not a conviction. A tool can be set aside when it stops paying off. A house that truly believed in its own legend would have perished under Rogar. A house that simply used the legend survived for another 8,000 years.
And the calculation paid off almost immediately. When the Andals finally reached the north and Argos 7-star landed with his army, it was King Theon Stark, known as the Hungry Wolf, who defeated him. And he didn't do it alone. The Boltons stood in that same line, and the Battle of the Weeping Water went down in the chronicles as a joint victory. Think about that image. The river where the Dreadfort stands. Yesterday's sworn enemies, shoulder to shoulder. A house whose kings had burnt Winterfell twice was saving the North alongside Winterfell.
Here is the first half of the Bolton survival formula. Be terrifying. And here is the second, without which the first doesn't work. Be necessary. After the Weeping Water, the Dreadfort ceased to be just a dangerous neighbor to be tolerated. It became a military force that the Starks relied upon. Destroying such a vassal is costly, not only because they bite back hard, but because without them, there is a hole in the defense. The Boltons built a position for themselves where it was equally disadvantageous to anger them or to remove them. Honestly, it's brilliant. And it's also a direct path to one day overestimating one's own invulnerability.
They overestimated it quickly. Rogar's oath did not mean that the Boltons had truly submitted. What followed was a long series of rebellions, and each one was resolved using the same pattern, which makes this scheme particularly clear. Thousands of years ago, the Boltons rose against the Starks, not alone, but in alliance with the Grey Starks of the Wolf's Den. The rebellion failed. And now look closely, because what follows is the most telling fact in the entire history of the house. The Grey Starks ceased to exist after that. They were wiped out completely. The house vanished from the history of the North. But the Boltons remained. The same rebellion, the same allies, a different outcome.
Why? The canon provides no direct answer, and here I am honestly venturing into interpretation. But this interpretation is supported by the text. The Grey Starks descended from a cadet branch of the Starks themselves. Their betrayal was a betrayal of kin, and in Westeros, kin are dealt with exemplary harshness, so that other relatives have something to think about. And most importantly, the Grey Starks weren't terrifying. They could be erased, and the erasure would have been cheap. That didn't work with the Dreadfort. Every assault on that castle would have cost Winterfell so many men that after the victory, the North would have been left without an army. And winter, as we know, is always coming. It was simpler to accept a new oath and keep living.
There it is, the mechanism in its purest form. The Boltons' reputation acted as an insurance policy. It didn't save them from defeat, it saved them from the consequences of defeat. They knew how to lose with the same profit that other houses used to win. It's worth pausing for a second here to imagine what the Dreadfort was like in the winter of that era. A stone monolith on the river bank. Snow that doesn't melt for months, a kennel in the courtyard, stairs leading down into the darkness. No songs, no tournaments, no colorful pavilions. The castle is called the gloomiest in the north.
And it's not just because of the rumors about the dungeons. It's because nothing human ever emanated from the Dreadfort. Not a single Bolton in thousands of years has gone down in history as just, generous, or even boisterous. It is a house without a single bright legend about itself.
Восстания продолжались. Известно, что Болтоны угрожали Винтерфеллу во времена правления короля Эдрика, известного как «Снежная борода». Известно, что несколько столетий назад они опять восстали, и тогда Старки решили серьезно взяться за них. Армии короля Харлана Старка осаждали Дредфорт и стояли перед ним 2 года. Двухлетняя осада. Не 2 месяца, не одно зимнее явление. Вот сколько понадобилось времени, чтобы заморить голодом замок. И даже тогда он был не взят штурмом, а Болтоны сдались сами, когда закончилась еда.
Keep that in mind the next time you hear that the Boltons were merely a minor house under the Starks. A 2-year siege implies supplies, walls, discipline, and a lord who knows how to count grain. This is not a den of bandits. It is a fortified state within a state that simply temporarily agreed to be called a vassal.
And now we approach the main turning point of their entire history. About 1,000 years ago, the Boltons once again bent the knee to Winterfell, but this time the terms were different. They were required to abandon the very custom for which they were feared. No more flayed skins, no more trophies, no more cloaks. The house had to publicly renounce its own primary tool.
By the way, there's a subtlety about that 1,000 years that few people know. The figure comes from the thoughts of Theon Greyjoy in the second book, and the text nowhere confirms it independently. Martin could well have used it figuratively, in the same sense that we say, "I've told you 1,000 times." Around that same time, Carlon Stark built a castle on lands taken from a certain rebellious lord, and from that castle grew House Karstark. Who that rebellious lord was is not explicitly stated, but the geography and chronology suggest the answer so insistently that it is hard to ignore. This is a theory, not canon, but it is a beautiful theory. The Karstarks, the eternal neighbors and rivals of the Boltons, may be sitting on Bolton land.
Now about the deal itself. On paper, the Starks won. They took the Fangs away from the Dreadfort, let the house live, and secured the East. In reality, something much more interesting happened, and the consequences of this stretched for 1,000 years. The Boltons abandoned the practice publicly and continued it secretly. The rumors about this never ceased, and in the books everyone repeats them, that somewhere beneath the Dreadfort they still flay prisoners, that the trophy room exists and is being replenished, that among the skins are royal ones. None of these rumors are confirmed. Each of them has lived its own life for 1,000 years.
And this is where the house made the mistake that ultimately killed it, even though it looked like a clever trick. While the tradition was official policy, it was managed. The Red King decided when to apply it and against whom, and every application was a message with a clear recipient. When the tradition went underground, the management ended. Only the gossip remained, and gossip doesn't ask for permission. It grows when it is disadvantageous to the house, surfaces at the moment when an impeccable reputation is needed, and attributes things to the Boltons that they perhaps never did.
From there, the chain unfolds almost mechanically. Old Nan tells the children of Winterfell a story about the Room of Skins. The children grow up. Bran remembers this story and asks his brother if it's true. Robb, the king and commander-in-chief, admits that he cannot look at a silent Roose without remembering that same room. In other words, in the 1,000 years since renouncing the tradition, the Boltons achieved one thing. Their liege lord fears them just as their enemies feared them in the Age of Heroes, but at the same time, the liege lord owes them nothing, because formally they are obedient vassals. The fear remained. The profit from the fear evaporated.
Look at what this means in practice.
In the Age of Heroes, the terror of the Dreadfort forced opponents to surrender without a fight, and that converted into lands and a crown. 1,000 years later, that same terror brings the house nothing but distrust. Ravella Smallwood says of a girl in Bolton clothing that there are plenty of people ready to hang her on the spot just for the flayed man on her chest, not for her actions, but for the sigil. That is what the house's asset turned into.
The crises are behind them. The house survived them all. Conquest, rebellions, a 2-year siege, erased allies, lost lands, a forced renunciation of its own essence. Not a single Stark in 8,000 years managed to finish them off. And now let's look at the people you know from the books and the show, because the killer of House Bolton is sitting right there, and his name is not Ramsay.
His name is Roose, and this is the most uncomfortable conclusion in this entire analysis, because Roose Bolton, if judged superficially, is the best lord of the Dreadfort in its entire history. He led the house to what the Red Kings could only dream of. He gained Winterfell, he became Warden of the North, he won the war without losing a single major battle personally, and yet in a few years he squandered a 1,000-year legacy to nothing.
Let's start with what kind of lord he was. Roose does not raise his voice. He speaks so quietly that his interlocutors lean forward to hear him, and this is a conscious technique. A silent Bolton is more terrifying than a shouting one. Jaime notes that Roose's silence is 100 times more threatening than the overt malice of Vargo Hoat. At the same time, he doesn't look like a monster. He is polite, neat, well-read, and understands military affairs better than almost all the northern lords. And he regularly applies leeches to himself, believing it cleanses the blood of impurities, for which he is called Lord Leech behind his back.
His personal role is simple: a peaceful land, a quiet people. He repeats this mantra like a creed. And this is where it's easy to fall into the trap that almost every viewer falls into. It seems that Roose represents a departure from family tradition, that he is a civilized Bolton who has outgrown the savagery of his ancestors. The reality is the exact opposite. Roose is not a deviation from the house doctrine. Roose is its pinnacle, its purest embodiment in 1,000 years.
Let's break this down with a specific example, and it's a grim one, so I will state it briefly and without detail. Once, while hunting along the Weeping Water, Roose saw a miller's wife. The miller had married without his lord's permission, and Roose felt he had been cheated. He hanged the miller and violated the woman right there on the spot. A year later, she came to the gates of the Dreadfort with an infant in her arms. Roose intended to deal with both of them quickly and harshly, but the child had his own eyes, and that stopped him. And now, the most important part of this story, the one almost no one analyzes. The woman explained that her late husband's brother had driven her from the mill. Roose reacted instantly. He gave her the mill, appointed an annual allowance, and sent pigs, chickens, and a pouch of coins. As for the miller's brother, he ordered his tongue cut out, not for the insult, but so that he wouldn't run to Winterfell with stories that might trouble Lord Rickard Stark.
This is the Bolton doctrine in miniature, honed to perfection. Roose doesn't hide the crime, he hides the story of the crime. He is fundamentally indifferent to what he did. What matters to him is exclusively who finds out about it and in what form. A peaceful land, a quiet people, does not mean peace and quiet at all. It means do whatever you want, but don't let it be talked about. He articulates this perfectly clearly himself, while reprimanding Ramsay. No one has ever told stories about me, or I would not be sitting here. Your amusements are your own business, but be careful. Barbary Dustin, a woman who knows him all too well, describes him even more ruthlessly. According to her, Roose has no feelings at all. The leeches sucked all the passions out of him many years ago. He does not love, he does not hate, he does not grieve. To him, everything happening is just a moderately amusing game. Some hunt, others keep falcons, others cast dice. Roose plays with people.
Combine this with the history of the house, and the picture becomes frighteningly consistent. For 8,000 years, the Boltons learned to dose their terror so that it turned a profit. Roose brought this skill to the absolute. He knows how to be terrifying without a single public atrocity. He serves Robert in his rebellion, fights at the Trident, then honestly fulfills his duties as a bannerman. And Ned Stark, over all those years, finds not a single grievance against the Lord of the Dreadfort. Jon recalls this directly. Eddard Stark never had reason to complain about Lord Bolton, an ideal vassal, absolutely silent.
And this ideal vassal had a son, who is almost never spoken of. In the show, he simply doesn't exist, and in the books he is mentioned only in passing, in conversations about entirely different matters. Meanwhile, this very man is the main crossroads in the entire history of the house. Had he lived a few years longer, there might never have been any talk of the end of the Boltons.
Domeric Bolton, true-born heir, the only child of Roose and Bethany Ricewell to survive to adulthood. Domeric was fostered as a page by his aunt, Lady Barbary Dustin in Barrowton, then as a squire to Lord Hodder Efford in the Vale. He played the harp. He was an excellent rider. He read. By all accounts, he was a normal young lord, polite, educated, and in no way resembling the nightmare on the pink banner. Barbary truly loved him, and her grief for him is still alive today.
Do you understand what this means? The House of Bolton had a chance. For the only time in thousands of years, an heir to the Dreadfort grew up to be a normal person. Not soft, not stupid, just normal. A house that relied on the reputation for monstrosity for millennia could have had a lot under whom that reputation would have begun to fade, while their lands and status remained the same. The ideal finale for the Bolton strategy. Outlive all rivals and finally stop being the boogeyman. Domeric died young, shortly after he sought to get to know his bastard half-brother better. Maester Uthor wrote that a sick belly was to blame. Roose is certain his son was poisoned. And this is where the reason the House of Bolton ceased to exist begins.
Left without an heir, Roose brought Ramsay to the Dreadfort, not because he loved him, not because he recognized his rights, but because he had no other sons, and a house without an heir is a house that neighbors will tear apart. The decision looks forced and almost reasonable. In reality, it is the greatest mistake in the history of the Boltons, and Roose saw it. He spoke of it aloud. Discussing the future with Theon, he calmly notes that his new wife, Walda, will bear him sons, and Ramsay will, of course, kill them. And this, he says, is even for the best, because he himself will not live to see them come of age, and child lords ruin any house.
Listen again. The head of one of the oldest houses in the north speaks aloud about his heir slaughtering all his other children and finds practical utility in it. Barbary is right. This man truly has no feelings. But it's not even about feelings. It's about the fact that Roose, a master of reputation management, voluntarily handed over the management of his house's reputation to the one type of person with whom the system cannot work.
Because Ramsay doesn't want to be feared correctly. Ramsay wants to be talked about. He signs letters in blood instead of ink so that the recipient notices.
he sends Jon Snow a message from which it is clear the author is savoring every word. He wears the nickname Bastard of the Dreadfort like a title. Everything Roose spent 1,000 years hiding, Ramsay puts on display. And this, to return to the very beginning, is the complete opposite of the ancestral doctrine. The Red Kings used terror as a message to a recipient. Roose used it as an invisible threat. Ramsay uses it as entertainment. 3 generations of one family, and by the third, the tool has become an end in itself.
Здесь стоит отделить книгу от сериала, потому что они расходятся фундаментально. Это не мелкие урезки ради сценного времени. Это 2 разные истории с разным мышлением и смыслом. И что важнее, обе версии говорят о трагедии Руса Болтона по-разному. Анализировать их вместе бессмысленно, поэтому давайте разберем это по очереди.
In the show, the arc is extremely direct. Roose becomes Warden of the North, restores Winterfell, and marries the legitimized Ramsay to Sansa Stark to legitimize his power over the North through her. Then, Walda bears a son, and Ramsay immediately kills his father, then disposes of his stepmother and the infant by setting the hounds on them. Then comes the Battle of the Bastards, defeat, capture, and an end that the show framed as poetic justice. Ramsay dies by his own pack. The House of Bolton disappears completely in one season.
In the books, everything is more complex and, in my opinion, scarier. Ramsay is not married to Sansa, but to Jane Paul, the daughter of the steward of Winterfell, who is passed off as Arya Stark. The substitution is fundamental. The Boltons' power over the North rests on a fraud, and half the Northern lords suspected. By the end of A Dance with Dragons, Roose is alive. Walda has not yet given birth. Winterfell is packed with feuding garrisons. Someone is killing people in the castle at night. The Freys and Manderleys are reaching their weapons against each other. And Roose himself won't touch his food until Wyman Manderley tastes it first. The battle in the ice with Stannis is not finished.
Хто написав листа на стіні, який прийшов до Джона Сноу, досі залишається предметом жорсткої полеміки, і воно одне з найбільш обговорюваних таємниць у циклі. Але обидві версії погоджуються в одному, і це найголовніше. Болтони були знищені Старками, вони були знищені арифметикою, яку вони самі вважали своєю найбільшою силою протягом 8000 років.
Look, as long as the Boltons were vassals, their reputation of being monsters worked like armor. Their liege lord feared them, their neighbors didn't touch them, and destroying them was too costly. But the moment Roose took the place of the liege lord, everything flipped. The Warden of the North has no one above him to guarantee order. The Warden of the North needs not terrified vassals, but loyal ones. And loyalty cannot be bought with fear. Fear only buys silence, and only one opportunity. The words about Roose are stated plainly in the book. He is feared but not loved, and the North has not forgotten the Red Wedding, because every lord in Winterfell lost kin there. It only takes drawing blood from a Bolton once, and the Northmen will fall away on their own.
This is the moment for which we analyze the entire ancient history. A house built on fear is physically incapable of ruling. It is only capable of surviving under someone else's authority. For 8,000 years, the Boltons occupied a niche perfect for them. Too scary to be touched, too useful to be removed, and always just below the summit, where someone else is responsible for order. The Red Wedding pushed them to the top, and at the summit, their only asset instantly turned into a liability.
The Mirror of Generations works here with almost mocking precision. Rogar the Huntsman gave his own sons to the Starks as hostages and saved his house by doing so. Roose handed his house to the only son who could not be controlled, and by doing so, he killed the house. Royce II and Royce IV burned Winterfell as enemies, coming from the outside.
Ramsay burned Winterfell while being its master. The same actions, only before they worked for the house, and now they work against it.
And now, a question for you, and there is truly no obvious answer to it. Could Roose have acted differently? He had no other heirs. To kill Ramsay meant leaving the Dreadfort without a master in the midst of a war. Not to kill him meant what happened. Write in the comments if you see a way out here, because honestly, I do not. We have traced the path of the house from the Age of Heroes to the Ashes, but one layer remains, and it is the most interesting one, because Martin has stitched into this house several things that are never explicitly stated in the text.
Let's start with the sigil, because it is worth returning to it knowing everything else. A flayed man on a pink field. The color pink does not appear anywhere else in the heraldry of Westeros, and that is no accident. Pink is the color of what remains when the skin is gone. That is to say, the Boltons literally made their background a human body without protection. The house sigil depicts not the victor, but the state of the victim, and the Lord of the Dreadfort wears this state upon himself like clothing. Next is something you simply cannot brush aside. All the other houses lie about themselves on their sigils, in a flattering way. The Lannisters are not lions, the Baratheons are not stags, the Tyrells are not roses. These are idealized images that the houses want to project. The Boltons are the only ones who depicted the absolute truth on their banner. Their sigil is a confession that is hung on every castle wall for thousands of years. Even when the house officially renounced the practice, the banner remained the same. They renounced it in words, but never thought to fix the sigil.
It is worth talking about the leeches separately, as this is the most underrated metaphor in Martin's work. Roose is convinced that bad blood corrupts a man, and so he regularly bleeds himself with leeches. He does to himself exactly what his ancestors did to their enemies, methodically, calmly, for the sake of purification. And, according to Barbary, the leeches have sucked all the passion out of him. In other words, we are looking at a man who voluntarily and systematically deprives himself of what makes him alive and considers it hygiene. Now apply this picture to the entire house. For 8,000 years, the Boltons have been draining themselves of everything that could make them ordinary people: pity, reputation, allies, the right to a normal heir. They believed they were purifying themselves.
In fact, they were bleeding themselves dry.
There is a historical parallel, and it is more accurate than it seems. Martin almost always draws from real history, and the Bolton strategy is no invention. This is how real ancient empires worked. Above all, the Assyrian, a demonstrative, intentionally horrific massacre of one city so that the next 10 would open their gates on their own. This is not pathology. It is the military economics of a poor state that has fewer soldiers than its opponents, exactly the position of the Dreadfort. And the outcome of such a strategy in real history is always the same. It works brilliantly as long as the central authority holds, and it instantly turns against you when you weaken, because the conquered never loved you for a second. They were just waiting.
Ассирия рухнула быстро и без одного союзника. Теперь к теориям. И я сразу скажу, все, что следует, спекуляция читателей, а не канон, и Мартин не подтвердил ни одну из этих версий. Все равно стоит анализировать их, потому что сами теории ясно показывают, какое место этот дом занимает в воображении читателей. У каждого будут аргументы «за» и «против».
The first concerns the Night's King. The World of Ice and Fire, while listing versions of who the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch was, mentions a Bolton, among others. A segment of the community builds an entire construct upon this. The Night's King took a woman with cold skin and eyes like stars, ruled the Night's Watch as his own kingdom, and had to be overthrown by the combined forces of the king in the north and the king beyond the wall.
There are arguments in favor of the Bolton version. The house is ancient, descends from the first men, and is known for its cult of skin and physicality, and the Dreadfort is closer to the wall than Winterfell. The arguments against are stronger.
The same source names 5 other surnames, including the Starks themselves, and does so precisely to show that the real answer has not been preserved. The Maesters are listing rumors, not conducting investigations. In my view, the Bolton version is beautiful, but it rests on a single mention in a list, and it is not worth building anything serious upon it.
Вторая теория много смелее, и она анализируется скорее потому, что отлично иллюстрирует, как работает репутация дома. Некоторые читатели предполагают, что Болтоны используют содравшую кожу не как трофей, а как магический инструмент, наподобие того, который используют безликий Бравоса, и что глава дома, соответственно, не меняется, а просто меняет тело. Поддерживает это немного, но то, что говорит, громко. Магия Брактения в Берта все-таки существует во Вселенной и действительно связана с лицами и кожей, а Рус представлен почти неестественно, как человек без возраста и без чувств.
And now, honestly, just about everything else speaks against this theory. For the Faceless Men, the magic is tied to the temple, to a god, and to rigorous training, not to the act of flaying itself. There is not a single hint in the text that the Boltons possess any magic whatsoever. And, most importantly, the theory breaks what Martin was writing this house for in the first place. If the Boltons are immortal sorcerers, then their entire plotline about heredity, upbringing, and the price of reputation turns into mysticism. This is a case where the simple explanation is more convincing than the beautiful one. Roose is not immortal. Roose is just a very cold man, and that is scarier than any magic.
And finally, the question that remains open in the books. A Dance with Dragons ends at Winterfell, full of foreign garrisons and nightly murders. Wyman Manderly, whose son died at the Red Wedding, is playing his own game, and by all appearances has already begun settling scores with the Freys in a way that is not discussed in polite society. The Northern Lords exchange phrases about how the North remembers. Roose is still alive on the last page. The Battle of Ice has not been fought. Stannis is somewhere in the snows, and a letter with a pink seal arrives at the wall, the author of which fans have been unable to identify for 15 years.
So the finale of House Bolton in the books has not yet been written, and it may well differ from the show. The show gave Ramsay death by his own dogs. Neat, symbolic, satisfying for the viewer. Martin almost never works that way. For him, retribution usually comes not from the one you tortured, but from the one you simply didn't notice. And if we proceed from this logic, the end of the Boltons in the books will likely turn out to be quieter, more mundane, and far more humiliating than a kennel pit.
So was Ramsay an accident or the logical conclusion of 8,000 years? This question is usually settled head-on by choosing one of two sides. Either House of Monsters was sooner or later bound to birth the ultimate monster, or Ramsay was just a bad card that might not have been drawn. Both versions look logical, and both, in my opinion, miss the point. My answer is this: neither one nor the other. The correct answer hides in the structure of the Bolton system itself, and it can only be seen by going through their entire history, from the Age of Heroes to the Battle of the Bastards. We have gone through it, so now the answer is visible. Here is what it consists of.
House Bolton cultivated not one thing for centuries, but two. The first is terror. The second is control over terror. It was the second that made them great, and it was the one that was never spoken aloud, because it doesn't fit on a sigil. Rogar gave his sons as hostages, because he knew how to count. The Red King sat at the table with the March Kings, because they knew how to negotiate. Roose cut out the tongues not of his victims, but of his witnesses, because he understood the difference. For 8,000 years, the Boltons survived not thanks to cruelty, but thanks to the discipline with which they wielded that cruelty.
Проблема в том, что из этих двух вещей только первое передается по наследству. Склонность наследуется, дисциплина нет, ее воспитывают. Воспитывать было некому. Рамси вырос на мельнице, и первым единственным его проводником был человек по прозвищу Вонючки. Рус позже сам признается, что бастард не то чтобы не умел бы грамотаться, просто некому было научить его владеть мечом. 8000 лет дом культивировал породу и ни разу не задумался, что порода без воспитания – это всего лишь порода.
So, Ramsay is not an accident. He is exactly what happens to a Bolton if you remove everything from the equation except the blood. And at the same time, he is not a death sentence for the entire line, because before him, there was Domeric, who grew up in Barrington and the Vale, played the harp, and killed no one. The same father, the same blood, different upbringing, diametrically different results. Martin placed these two side by side for a reason. He put the answer right in the text and never once underlined it.
Let's return to where we started. The Boltons truly did not lose to the Starks in any real sense. They were beaten, besieged, brought to their knees, stripped of their lands, but each time they were left alive because killing them was more expensive than tolerating them. For 8,000 years, their reputation was their armor. And then they reached the summit, and it turned out that at the summit, armor does not save you. You need allies there, and a house that had invested only in fear for millennia found it had none.
They were not defeated by Winterfell. They were not defeated by Stannis, and they were not defeated by Jon. They were killed by that very room in the dungeon that perhaps never even existed. The room that old Nan told children fairy tales about at night. And the grown children then couldn't look at a pink banner without wanting to reach for a sword. For 8,000 years, House Bolton diligently composed a story about how scary they were. The story turned out so well that it eventually outlived its authors and buried them.
A naked man has few secrets, a flayed man has none left. The Boltons repeated this for millennia, took pride in it, and failed to notice the most obvious thing. They flayed themselves. Slowly, carefully, layer by layer, generation by generation. And when the time came to ask for help, no one stood up for them because there was nothing left to ask with. Write in the comments what you think. Did this house have a chance to survive if Domeric had remained alive, or was its fall a matter of time in any case? I am genuinely curious because there are arguments on both sides, and I don't have absolute certainty in my own conclusion. And subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdown.
I found the Chronicle and the Citadel archives that I hadn't even begun to write yet. 47 pages, written in my own hand, the same slant leaning to the right, the same greasy ink blot on the word dragon, because my fingers always twitched whenever I wrote that word. On the 7th page, the death of a man was described in detail, down to the hour and the smell of burning feathers, a man who, at that very moment, was alive and sitting 2 walls away from me, coughing over his ravens. He died 9 days later. Everything matched: the hour, the scent, and the way he tried to grab his quill knife from the table in his final second. And at the bottom of the last page was the title. 4 words that made my lips go numb and my tongue feel as dry as old parchment. A song of ice and fire. My name is Samwell Tarley. I have been called a coward, a fat boy, a disgrace to my house, and all of it was the absolute truth. I have never killed a man with a sword, but in the years I spent under the Citadel, I decided the fate of more people than my father did in all his wars, and I still don't know which parts of it I saw and which I invented myself. But first things first. I arrived in Old Town at the end of summer on a merchant cog from the south, and the first thing I remembered was the smell.
not the sea. I had grown to loathe the sea to the point of nausea by then. It smelled of wet stone, the smoke of smithies, rotting seaweed on the pilings, and for some reason, honey, because the river the city stands upon is called the Honey Wine, and hives have been kept along its banks since immemorial. I stood on the docks with 2 sacks of books, a woman who wasn't mine, a babe who wasn't mine, and a long bundle wrapped in an oilcloth, and I felt that things could never get any worse than they already were. I was in my 19th year, and I was almost happy.
The citadel is not a tower or a castle. It is an entire city within a city. Bridges, courtyards, winding stairs, walls black with mold, and a scent I would later recognize from any distance, the smell of old paper, oak galls, and rendered tallow in the lamps. People come there as boys and stay there for their entire lives. At first you are a novice, one who holds books, cleans raven cages, and has no right to even sit at the common table with the seniors. Then, if you have enough stubbornness, you forge yourself a chain. Each link is earned for a separate discipline. Copper for accounts and writing, tin for healing, black iron for ravens and messages.
A maester wears his learning right on his neck, and the heavier his neck, the more he knows. The first months were the best time of my life, and I say this knowing everything that happened after. I was assigned to transcribe and clear out the clutter in the lower archives, and for the first time in 19 years, my only skill proved to be a virtue rather than a disgrace. Back home, I read in secret, under the covers, and my father would break my candles against the edge of the table for it. Here, I was praised for the very same thing. I could distinguish a scribe from Volantis from one from King's Landing by their handwriting. I could smell a forgery by the color of the ink. I could find pages in hastily bound collections that had been inserted later by a different hand, and the seniors chuckled at first, but then they stopped.
We didn't live in the citadel itself, but in an inn nearby, in a small room right under the roof where the floorboards creaked and a mouse scurried behind the wall all night long. Gille did laundry and helped in the kitchen, and the babe grew and screamed at night so loudly the rafters shook. I would come home after dark, reeking of ink and dust, and she would silently set a bowl of pottage before me and sit opposite, resting her cheek on her palm. We barely spoke. She had nothing to tell me about the kitchen, and I had nothing to tell her about the 7th century and the census of tax-paying households.
But I still remember how the room smelled of sour milk, wet wool, and cheap candles, and it is the only scent in my life that still makes something in my chest let go.
At the Citadel, I made one true friend, a novice everyone called the Sphinx, because no one could figure out where he came from. He shot a bow better than any guard, knew 4 languages, watered down his wine, and always sat where he could see the door. He never asked me about the wall or what I had brought back from there. He simply pushed a book across the table to me one day, the very one I had been searching for 3 weeks, and went back to his supper. For that, I was ready to follow him anywhere, and as it turned out later, I did.
I was taken under the wing of an archmaester who wore the tin link of a healer, a heavy, wheezing old man with kind eyes and perpetually cold hands. He spoke slowly, listened attentively, and never interrupted. He was the first person in my entire life to ask what I was interested in, and upon hearing my answer, he didn't burst out laughing. He would pour me wine, ask about my dreams, check the pulse on my wrist, complain about his own knees, and one day he said that I would make a good maester because I knew how to notice things that others skipped over. I was so grateful, my eyes nearly stung. I never thought a person could study you so thoroughly, so tenderly, and all the while know exactly what you were being studied for.
Under my bed lay the bundle in the oilcloth, the Valyrian sword of my house, black steel with smoky ripples,
forged not with a hammer, but with sorcery, the secret of which died with Valyria. I had stolen it from my father when I left, simply took it off the wall and carried it away. And that was the only truly daring act of the first 19 years of my life. My father had told me more than once, standing over that blade, "Steel senses who holds it, and it would never recognize me." I didn't argue. I didn't even sharpen it. I just unwrapped the cloth once a month, looked at the smoky ripples, and wrapped it back up.
And then came the little things, to which I paid no attention at the time. The novice whose bunk I had been given died the day before I arrived, young, healthy, collapsed in the courtyard at night, and no one could say why. The old man assigned to the Ravens sometimes called me by a different name, Allard, and when I corrected him, he would look at me with horror and apologize, as if he had stepped on a corpse. And another thing, from above, from the gallery over the archives, people would sometimes stand and watch me. Not with curiosity. It's the look they give when they're calculating how many pages an hour, how many hours in a row, how much can he take. I decided that I had finally gotten lucky in life. Luck is what you see before you know who exactly has chosen you.
It all started with ink on my fingers. I woke up one day before dawn because my arm had gone numb, and I saw that the tips of 3 fingers on my right hand were black, and there was dried ink under my nails. The candle on the table had burned down to nothing, even though I clearly remembered blowing it out when I went to bed. I blamed it on exhaustion, washed my hands in the basin, and went to work. And it wasn't until noon, while sorting through my bag, that I found a sheet of paper folded in 4. My handwriting, my ink blot, and text I hadn't written. A description of a circular room with sandstone walls, where it smelled of scorched stone, and where a woman with hair the color of molten silver stood by a window, listening to a crowd in the square below, shouting a word in a language I did not know.
I reread that sheet 20 times. Then I burned it in the brazier and stood watching the paper blacken. And at that moment, something happened to me for the first time that would later repeat hundreds of times. I remembered what that room smelled like. I didn't imagine it. I remembered it. It's how one remembers the scent of a grandmother's chest, not how one imagines what one has read. My palms turned icy and wet, and I wiped them on my robes and decided I was overworked, that I wasn't sleeping enough, that I needed to eat less fat and walk more. A person can explain anything to themselves if the explanation allows them not to change their life.
After that, it happened more often. Every 7 or 8 days, I would wake up with ink-stained fingers and a headache so severe that spots swam before my eyes from the light. Sometimes I found sheets, sometimes I didn't. One day I found 9 whole pages, written solid without a single mistake, and I am incapable of writing without mistakes even when I am calm. There was a man in a gold cloak with a severed right hand, a girl on a strange street counting coins in her fist, a cold forest road, and a dead horse. I didn't know any of them, not one. And yet I knew that the man with the stump felt pain in his limb before the rain, and that the girl wasn't afraid of thieves, but of being recognized.
The old man at the Ravens, the one who confused names, began calling me Allard more and more often during those weeks. One day he grabbed my sleeve with his dry, gripping fingers, pulled me close, and whispered, "Don't give them the blank sheets. Do you hear, Allard? Never leave blank sheets for yourself." I gently pulled his hand away, led him to his chair, and poured him some water. He immediately forgot what he was talking about and began complaining that the White Raven, the one they release from the Citadel when the Conclave declares the end of summer, refused to take food from his hand again.
I left to myself at the old man's babble. I left to myself quite a lot that year.
My kind Archmaester became more attentive. He now asked me every time to describe my dreams, in detail, what I saw, what I heard, what it smelled like. He would probe my skull with his dry, cold fingers, measure my pulse against an hourglass, and brew a special infusion for me, bitter, with a taste of burnt bark that left a coating in my mouth. He explained it as concern, a youth from the north, a hard journey, bad blood it needed strengthening. I drank it and thanked him. It all looked like care, right up until the day I found out that the very same infusion had been brewed for 4 others for 3 decades in a row, and that all 4 had ended the same way. That was when he appeared in my life, an Archmaester with a black glass link in his chain, so dull it looked like a hole in the metal. He was well over 70, dry, upright, with a steady, quiet voice of a man whom no one had ever interrupted. He didn't give orders. He would walk up, sit down on the bench beside me, and strike up a conversation about the census of tax-paying households, and half an hour later, you would find yourself telling him about the dead beyond the wall, about blue eyes, about how a hand burns in black fire, and no one had even twisted your arm. He listened in a way that made you want to keep talking.
He offered to let me forge a link ahead of schedule, immediately, without waiting in line, bypassing those who had been waiting for 3 years. He said the Citadel had work for a man who knew how to notice pages that had been inserted later. He placed a dry, light hand on my shoulder, and I felt a chill down my spine, that same primal chill that has nothing to do with the air temperature, like in childhood when my father would enter a room and stay silent. For the first time in my life, I lied to a superior. I said I would think about it, that I needed to consult someone. He smiled as if I had said something very sweet, and replied that I had plenty of time, that I had exactly as much time as he would give me. And then there was the staircase. In the lower archives, behind the shelves of harbor manifests, in a corner where the light didn't reach, steps led downward, and at the bottom stood a door reinforced with iron bands. The door was warm, not damp and cold like the rest of the cellar, but warm, like the side of a furnace, and a draft pulled noticeably from below, even though there shouldn't have been anything beneath it. When I asked one of the senior novices about it, he turned back to his lists and said it was flooded with seawater, and there was no reason to go down there. He said it too quickly and too flatly, like a memorized lesson.
That was when I should have taken Gilly, the baby, and left. Anywhere. To Dorne, to Bravos, back to the north, to the Black Crows, and the dead, because the dead, as it turned out, are more honest. I had money. I had a sword that was worth an entire castle. I should have just stood up from the table, walked to the inn, and never come back. Instead, I sat up nights thinking about what a fool that old man was, muttering about clean slates. 11 days later, I stole his keys.
I didn't take the keys out of malice, but because I couldn't sleep anymore. The old man kept them on a string under his pillow, and when he dozed off over his ledgers, I pulled the string out with 2 fingers, slowly, like pulling out a splinter. My hands were shaking so hard, the keys jingled, and he muttered something in his sleep. And I stood over him, not breathing for what felt like an eternity. Then I left, crossed 2 courtyards in the drizzle, went down to the lower archives, and pretended to work until midnight, moving the same manifests from shelf to shelf. I had taken a thick, cheap candle, the kind that burns for 4 hours. It lasted 2.
There were over 100 steps. I counted to 80, then lost track and just kept walking down, trailing my left palm along the wall, and the wall changed under my fingers. First wet, cold stone, then dry, then warm, smooth, polished, as if hands had been running over it for centuries. The air below wasn't cellar air. It was dry and still, and it smelled of old paper, salt,
and faintly, very faintly, of something burnt. It was easy to breathe, and that was what frightened me the most. In a dungeon with no windows or vents, the air shouldn't be like that.
I opened the door with the third key. Behind it wasn't a cellar, but a hall, long, stretching into the darkness, with a ceiling lost above the reach of my candle. Shelves, 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 and on each one, bindings, dark, identical with copper brackets on the corners. I raised the candle to the nearest spine. The spines were marked with years, ordinary years, counted from the conquest, a familiar thing for any scribe. And on the third shelf to the right were years that hadn't happened yet. The one following the current year, and the one after that, and 8 more after those.
I didn't reach for them right away. I stood and listened to my own heart, and it felt like it could be heard throughout the entire hall. Then, finally, I took down one volume, the nearest of the future ones, and it was as heavy as a tombstone. I laid it on the lectern, wiped my palms on my robe, wiped them again because they were instantly damp once more, and flipped open the cover. The first pages were filled in a dry, businesslike hand, not my own. Harvests, taxes, how many ships entered the harbor, who died and where. And then the handwriting changed.
My handwriting, my slant to the right, my ridiculous D with a long loop, my ink blot. 20, 30, 40 pages in a row. I read about people I had never met, about cities I had never been to, about feasts, battles, and beds, and it was all written exactly as I write, with my habit of clinging to the details, what it smelled like, what the light was like, what the person was turning in their fingers at that moment. My fingers went numb up to my wrists, as if I held them in the snow for a long time. My jaw locked. I stood over the book, moving my lips, unable to swallow.
And then I reached the part where it was written about me, not Samuel Tarly saw from the outside like a stranger in the steady voice of a chronicler. The fat novice in a wet robe stands at the lectern, the candle has melted onto his left hand, he doesn't feel it. Now he will bring the flame closer to make out the word, now he will look back at the door. I brought the candle closer, I looked back at the door. Hot wax was indeed already dripping onto my hand, and only then I did feel the burn and dropped the candle, and it rolled across the stone floor, scattering light across the legs of the shelves.
I scrambled on all fours to pick it up. I was shaking violently as if in a fever, and I couldn't get my knees to hold my weight. As I stood up, the light slid across the bottom shelf, and I saw 3 volumes there, lying apart, with no year on the spine. I pulled them all out. 3 different handwritings. 3 chronicles, each of which broke off in the middle of a word, just an ink line trailing downward like the track of a fallen quill. And at the end of each, on a sewn-in page, was the name of the scribe, and all 3 names were neatly, precisely crossed out by the same confident hand. The first of them was Allard.
I knelt among those books, my head feeling empty and echoing like a deserted hall, and I thought only one thing over and over. I am the 4th. Then, behind me, the door creaked briefly. A steady yellow light from an oil lamp spilled across the steps, and a voice that had never interrupted anyone calmly said that I could have just asked for the keys and they would have been given to me.
He didn't shout or call the guards. He came down, set the lamp on the lectern, neatly stacked the 3 foreign volumes, and pulled a stool over for me. In all my life,
No one had frightened me like this dry old man who simply invited me to sit. He said that since I had found it all myself, there was no point in lying to me, and that in the last 300 years of the 4 people who had reached this place on their own, not one had regretted the conversation. He spoke slowly, giving me time to breathe, and that was the most terrifying part. He understood people just as well as I understood ink.
He told me about the Chronicle, not the one they rewrite upstairs for kings, but this one, the real one, which has been kept here for 3 centuries. Once a generation, a person is born whose mind is capable of holding another's gaze, and the Citadel finds him, feeds him, waters him, protects him, and gives him a quill. Such a person sees what he has not seen and writes down what he does not know. Everything the world remembers about itself passes through his hand. He asked if I understood what an honor this was. I understood only one thing. The air in the hall was dry, but sweat was running down my back under my robe, and my shirt was sticking between my shoulder blades like a cold rag.
And then he said a phrase that I would hear in my head every night for many years. He said it evenly, without a hint of defiance, as one states the obvious. We do not write history. We put it in order. He explained that too. The world, he said, is full of people who slaughter children for omens, burn their kin for prophecies, and follow the first madman who promises fire from the sky. A dragon in a chronicle is a bonfire 100 years later. Remove the dragon from the book, and in 3 generations, no one will go looking for dragon eggs and burning cities down. The chronicle is not a mirror. The chronicle is a bridle, and it must be held by sober people, not by the one who writes it.
I asked what became of Allard. He didn't answer right away. First, he straightened the stack of volumes, aligning them with the edge of the lectern, and only then said that Allard was weak-chested and shouldn't have worked so much at night. He said it evenly and sadly, looking me in the eyes, and in that moment I understood everything about him. He wasn't a villain and didn't consider himself one. He was a man who had spent 40 years doing a hard job where sometimes you have to cross out more than just lines. My jaw locked so tight my teeth ached, and I nodded. He praised me for my prudence and led me upstairs, politely supporting me by the elbow as if I were an invalid.
2 days later, I was taken to a round tower on the outskirts, to an archmajor whom they didn't like at the Citadel and called the Mage. He was squat, bull-necked, with a mouth stained red from sour leaf, and a Valyrian steel link in his chain, the one for sorcery, which the others considered shameful. He looked me over, grunted, and said the old men downstairs had gathered themselves a new inkwell. Then he placed a candle on the table. It was made of black volcanic glass, obsidian, the very thing that cuts the dead, twisted, sharp-edged, a cubit high, and it couldn't burn because glass doesn't burn. It was burning.
The flame was unbearably white and gave off no heat, and from its light, the objects in the room cast shadows in the wrong direction. He told me to look into the fire and think of someone I knew. I thought of my brother, of the Night's Watch, of the one who sent me here to study, and I was yanked out. I have no other word for it. I was standing in a frozen courtyard in the snow. I had someone else's scarred hands, someone else's exhaustion in my lower back, someone else's smell of wet dog and iron, and I knew what that man was thinking. Knew it from the inside, the way you know your own thoughts. Then I was pulled further. A room smelling of spilled wine and ash. A woman counting her enemies on her fingers. Then a dusty foreign road and a girl learning not to look people in the face. I woke up toward morning on the floor, covered in ink up to my elbows, and beside me lay 20-some pages, written solid. My nose was bleeding, dripping onto the paper, and I stared blankly as a brown stain spread over the word dragon. My head was empty and light, like a hollowed-out egg. I didn't remember writing it. I remembered living other lives, and that turned out to be sweeter than anything that had ever happened to me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't a fat coward in the corner. I was everyone at once. The mage wiped my face with a wet rag, looked at me intently, and said that now I understood why the previous 3 hadn't run away.
In the evening, I went to the inn, and Gilly set a bowl of stew before me, and the baby was fussing in the basket by the stove, sniffling and kicking its legs. I sat there, holding the hot bowl in my palms, listening to a drunken carter arguing with the innkeeper about the price of oats behind the wall, listening to water dripping from the roof, to the crackle of a tallow candle. Ordinary life went on around me, warm, stupid, smelling of sour milk, and I couldn't force myself to feel it. Inside me there was snow, wine with ash, and a dusty foreign road. Gilly asked why my hands were black, and I replied that I had been doing a lot of copying. The first real lie between us weighed more than the Valyrian steel sword under the bed.
From that day on, I was officially transferred downstairs. The work was simple. Every few days, a candle, a night spent in someone else's eyes, a morning of a parchment, then sleep until noon. They forged me a copper link, then a second. They brought me food such as I had never eaten even in my father's castle. My kind Archmaester with the pewter link would check my pulse and rejoice at how rosy my cheeks had become. And I wrote greedily, breathlessly, noting the scent in a dying king's room and what a man fidgeted with while signing another's death warrant. I grew calm and nearly forgot about the 3 crossed-out names. I was sobered by a single sheet of parchment that I found in the place of my own.
I always submitted my work downstairs, and after a few days, the volumes would go to the shelves. And so, one day, while sorting the shelves, I pulled out my volume and opened it to a page I remembered word for word, because I had written it only 10 days prior. The page was there, only it no longer contained the woman with hair the color of molten silver. There were no 3 dragons hatched in a funeral pyre, no name of the people who had hailed her. All of it had been neatly crossed out with a thin, confident stroke, and above it, between the lines, was written in a small, unfamiliar hand, "Merchant rumors, unreliable, exclude." I flipped further, crossed out. Further still, crossed out.
I sat over that volume until morning, checking sheet after sheet, and by dawn I had counted more than 200 crossed-out passages. From my chronicle, they were erasing the same thing, everything that breathed: dragons, shadows, the dead rising, a woman walking into fire and emerging alive. All of it was being turned into merchant rumors, the ravings of drunken sailors, unreliable reports from the east. What remained were taxes, harvests, marriages, and sieges. The world I had recorded was terrifying and alive. The world that went onto the shelf was flat and dead, like a blueprint. And then I did what I do best. I began to compare the handwriting. No one had taught me this. I figured it out myself back home while sorting through old deeds. A thin, confident stroke, slightly doubled at the pressure point. That is how people write who have held a quill with 3 fingers their whole lives and whose joints have grown stiff. I pulled up old medical records, pulled up my own notes, pulled up the letters thanking me for my help with the census. The joint, the pressure, the slant. The edits in my chronicle were made by that same kind old man with the pewter link who checked my pulse and poured me wine.
the one who asked about my dreams, the one who was closer to me than a father.
I found the rest, too. It was easy to look once I was looking with open eyes. In the book of incoming letters, 2 months before my arrival, there was an entry. A novice requested and promised from the north, name specified. I had not been accepted into the citadel. I had been ordered. My brother in the black cloak had sent me to study, but here it had long been decided exactly whom he would send, and the kind archmaester had already been preparing the infusion while watching the calendar. I went to him anyway. Not to scream. I don't know how to scream. I simply laid the sheet with the edits and the sheet from the letter book before him and waited.
He looked at the papers. Then he took a pitcher from the shelf, poured himself some wine, poured some for me, and put the pitcher back, carefully aligning it with the ring left by its base on the tabletop. Then he sat down, placed his hands on his knees, and looked out the window where the usual all-down drizzle was falling. He did not say a word, no excuses, not threats, not even a sneer. He simply remained silent, steady and patient, the way one is silent over a cooling corpse. And in that silence I heard everything, that he knew, that he had been doing this for 30 years, and that there would be no help or malice from him because he was no longer a man, but a part of the routine. I walked out and vomited on the stairs, bile with the metallic taste of blood from a beaten cheek.
The answer came on the third night. I returned to my small room beneath the citadel, and on my table, held down by an inkwell, lay a sheet. My handwriting, my inkblot, and on it, the inn by the honey wine, the creak of floorboards, a mouse behind the wall, a woman sleeping on her side with her palm under her cheek, and a basket by the stove. And then, the hour, the smoke, how the straw caught fire under the roof, and why the door would not open. Below, instead of a date, were the words, "the 9th day of the next moon." I felt neither fear nor rage. I felt the floor literally fall out from under me. My knees buckled and I sat right there on the stone slabs, holding the sheet in an outstretched hand so as not to drip saliva on it. 22 days remained until the 9th.
The next morning, he spoke to me just as evenly and politely as the first time. He said that the chronicle is written through the eyes of others, while people live their own lives, and that my woman and child were the only things that were truly mine, and that this was very convenient for everyone. He did not demand anything impossible, only that I stop comparing handwriting, submit my sheets, stay away from the far shelves, and be grateful. He spoke and I looked at his hands and thought that these very 3 fingers had erased the woman with the dragons from the world. He left and I remained sitting, and a thin ringing filled my ears like after a blow to the head with the flat of a blade.
I found salvation where I least expected it. The mage from the round tower listened to me, spat blood into the brazier, and said he was leaving for the east and taking me with him. The ship was departing in 8 days, and there would be room for both the woman and the child. For 8 days I lived like a man. I gathered my things one by one so as not to be noticed. I pulled the bundle from under the bed and unwrapped the cloth for the first time in a year. I even smiled at Lolly over our pottage. But on the 9th day, I went up to the round tower, and the door was unlocked, and inside it was empty and cold. The table was wiped clean. The niche was empty. The black glass candles were gone. He had left 4 days ahead of schedule and had not left me a single line.
I stood in the middle of the cold room and listened to the gulls crying in the harbor above foreign sails.
That night, I did the thing for which I am still paying the price. I wanted to test one thing, the only one I hadn't tested yet. I lit a candle, and instead of watching, I began to write myself. Calmly, with my own hand, in full consciousness, I wrote into the chronicle a trifle that had not happened and could not have happened. That at the hour of the wolf,
a white raven would fly from the rookery, and the old man at the cages would drop and break his favorite clay mug with the chipped ear. Then I blew out the candle and sat until dawn, staring at the wall. In the morning, the entire citadel was buzzing. The white raven had left in the night, released by no one, and the old man was weeping over the shards of his mug, which he had brushed with his sleeve in the dark.
I did not sleep for 2 days. On the third, I took up my quill and wrote a second line. The man who had searched my room on orders and who had once punched a novice in the stomach in front of me for spilled ink would trip on the wet spiral staircase by the western courtyard and break his neck. I wrote and told myself that I was just testing, that it meant nothing, that I wasn't deciding anything anyway. By evening, they found him at the bottom of the stairs, his head turned the wrong way, and it was wet from the rain, and no one suspected a thing because everyone slips there. I shook for half the night, and then the tension broke, and the fact that it broke, frightened me more than anything else.
It meant the point wasn't what I saw. The point was what I wrote. For 3 centuries, the old man downstairs thought they were holding a mirror, and they carefully wiped it with a cloth, erasing dragons. They didn't have a mirror maker in their basement. They had someone who decides what happened. And one of them, 22 days ago, had personally explained to me what happens to people whose names are neatly crossed out with a ruler. He explained it very clearly. He just hadn't thought about whose hand writes the names in this house.
In the morning, I did not go downstairs. For the first time in a year, I slept well, ate everything they brought, and while shaving over a basin, I saw a stranger's face in the murky water, a gray streak at the temple that hadn't been there in spring, and eyes that no longer asked for anything. The fear hadn't gone away, it just stopped having anything to do with me, like an aching tooth one has grown used to. My whole life I was taught I was good for nothing, and I honestly believed it for 19 years. And then it turned out that my only ability to notice trifles and arrange them into words is exactly what truly kills in this world. For 3 nights in a row, I copied. I didn't invent, I copied, evenly and quickly, just as I had copied as a child under my blankets. I made copies of all 3 torn chronicles, of the bound sheets with the crossed-out names, of 200 pages of my own book, where over the living world, the small handwriting had inscribed, "Exclude." I copied the book of incoming letters for the necessary years, and the 3 notes about Allard's death, in which the hour matched, but the physician did not. Every night I carried the finished work under my tunic and handed it to the Sphinx, and he would take it silently and leave, never asking what I was dragging him into. He already knew.
I sent Lolly away on the 7th day. I found a merchant cog heading north, made arrangements with the captain, paid double and gave half up front. I told her I would follow, and she looked at me long and intently. She had known how to tell a lie since childhood. She had been taught that at home, where a lie was a matter of life and death. She said nothing. She simply shifted the infant to her left arm and with her right squeezed my wrist for a second, hard, painfully, the way one grabs a rope. Then the gangplank was pulled away. I stood on the pier until the sail became a dot, and on my tongue was the taste of salt and tobacco burned to ash.
That night I laid out everything I had on my bed. I unwrapped the bundle in the oiled cloth last. The Valyrian steel lay on the coarse blanket, black with smoky swirls, and in the lamplight it seemed as if smoke were flowing over it. I took it by the hilt. I took it correctly. My father had beaten the grip into me until I bruised as a child. The blade was light, impossibly light, and it still pulled my wrist down because it is not the hand that decides if a man is fit for the sword. My father told me, steel feels who holds it, and it would never recognize me. I stood with it,
listened to myself, and wrapped it back in the cloth. I didn't need to cut a man. I needed him to cease to be.
I spent the remaining hours until dawn, not on fear, but on work. I analyzed which Archmaesters feared what, who clung to their position, who hated their neighbor, who had been waiting 30 years for the Seneschal's chair to become vacant. I laid out my sheets in the order they needed to be presented, so that each subsequent one would strike harder than the last. The chronicle itself had taught me this, because a well-composed chronicle and a well-composed indictment are constructed the same way. I even rehearsed the silence, where to pause, where to let the silence gain weight. All my life, I was afraid to look people in the eyes. That night, I realized I didn't need to. Let them look at me.
The conclave gathered on the 4th day after the new moon, in the high vaulted hall where the seneschal is chosen and where no novice has the right to even stand at the doors. I did not need an invitation, I only needed everyone to be there, and they were all there already. I dressed in clean robes, tucked the rolled up sheets into my tunic, and carried the heavy tome from the shelf of future years under my arm, the very one started by another's hand. Before leaving, I sat at my desk one last time, dipped my quill, and wrote a single line into the chronicle. Just one. The one I hadn't dared to write all this time. Then I closed the tome, blew out the candle, and climbed the 100+ steps, counting them aloud so as not to lose my breath.
I entered the hall when they were already seated. 20-odd old men in gray robes, with chains hanging to their waists, under a vault where echoes wandered, and the air smelled of wax, dust, and stale smoke of braziers. The Sphinx held the heavy door for me and remained at the entrance. And in the opening behind his back, I saw the pale faces of the novices he had brought. 12 pairs of young eyes, and that was more important than anything else. What 12 people see can no longer be erased with a ruler. Someone tried to stop me with a shout. I did not stop, nor did I quicken my pace, and because of that, the shout somehow choked off on its own.
He sat third from the left, straight, dry, with a black glass link, and not a muscle in his face twitched. He was better than the rest even here. He didn't call the guards, he didn't show indignation, but calmly explained to the conclave that a poor youth from the north had lost his wits from overwork, and that he himself was to blame, the old fool, for not keeping a closer watch. He spoke of me in that same warm tone he had used with me for 2 years straight, and I listened, understanding that in a minute I would be led away by the arms, and by evening I would be weak of chest. My fingers cramped up so hard that the paper beneath them rippled. I placed the first sheet on the long table.
Then the second, then the third. I made no speeches. I simply laid them out and briefly named what they were. Allard's Chronicle, broken off mid-word, a bound sheet with his name crossed out with a ruler, a note about his death, where the time did not match the physician's report, 2 more chronicles, 2 more crossed-out names, an entry in the book of letters, where a novice from the north was requested and promised 2 months before anyone at the wall even knew of him. 200+ pages on which, over the living world, the word exclude was inscribed in tiny letters. The hall went very quiet. Silence in such a place has weight. First the benches stopped creaking, then someone forgot to breathe, then one could hear a coal popping in the brazier.
My good Archmaester with the tin link sat opposite me. He did not look at the papers. He looked at the table, and his right hand, the one with the joint worn down by 40 years of writing, slowly crawled under the tabletop as if it could be hidden somewhere. I placed the sheet with his edits before him, the one where the woman with the hair the color of molten silver was crossed out, and he finally raised his eyes. Once, for a moment. I had waited 2 years for that look and wondered what I would see in it. Malice? Shame? Justification? There was nothing there. There was only the weariness of a man whose work was finished.
He, the one with the black glass, made a final attempt. He said the papers could be forged, that handwriting is the easiest thing to forge, and that a boy stood before the conclave who himself admitted to writing about things he had never seen. It was a strong move. It was the only correct move, and it almost worked. The old men stirred. Some nodded, some reached to stand, and then I laid out on the table the last thing, the reason for which it all began, the heavy tome from the shelf of future years, open to the page I had inscribed with my own hand before coming up here. I turned the book toward him and asked him to read aloud. He read. His voice was the same, steady, quiet, never interrupted by anyone, and he read his own name and how he would be led out of this hall, and through which door, and what he would have in his hands, and what he would say on the threshold. He reached the middle, stopped, and realized he had already spoken the phrase written for him, the one I had put in his mouth 2 hours earlier, sitting downstairs over a candle. That was when what I had been waiting for happened. He looked at his 3 fingers holding the page as if they belonged to someone else. He had spent his whole life believing he held the quill, but the quill had been holding him his whole life.
I said only one thing to him. Not loudly. In such silence, there is no need for volume. I said, "You spent 40 years deciding whom history would remember. It will not remember you." And then I added the second phrase, the one for which it was worth enduring everything. We do not write history, we put it in order. I have put yours in order. He did not answer. There was nothing to answer with, and he understood that better than anyone in the hall.
What followed was mundane and therefore terrifying. The conclave did not judge him. The conclave simply resolved the issue, as one resolves an issue with a leaking roof. They removed his chain, link by link, and the last to be removed was the black glass one, and it clinked softly against the tabletop. His name was crossed out of the registers, with a ruler, the very same ruler, because they keep no other in the citadel. And since a man who is not in the registers can neither be judged, nor expelled, nor buried with honors, he was sent below, to that very hall, to those very shelves, as a copyist, to sit at a lectern and with his worn-out hand copy other people's chronicles in an eternal dry silence, where there is neither day nor night. He walked out through the door he himself had read aloud.
I said nothing to the second one. He approached me later in the corridor and stood nearby, moving his lips, for once intending to speak. I looked at him just long enough for him to understand that I saw him, and I walked past. He remained with his chain, his rank, and his knees that ached before the rain. He lived for 3 more years, and all 3 years I was silent to his face, just as steadily and patiently as he had been silent to me back then over a pitcher of wine. He once explained to me that silence costs nothing. He had to learn the price. 5 years have passed. I still live in the citadel, within the same damp walls, and my chain is now long and heavy, though I never truly forged a single one of these links. They were brought to me, quietly, as one brings a ransom. I did not become a seneschal or an archmaester. They try not to touch me at all. The old men look away. The novices fall silent when I pass by, and in that silence there is neither love nor respect. Only that with which one lives alongside, but does not sit at the same table. The chronicle is kept by a man who is not named me, and I chose him myself.
calm, lazy, without imagination. Such a one will cross nothing out and add nothing.
About the one who sits below, they speak rarely in the citadel, and never by name, because there is no name. Once a month, I go down those same steps, light a candle for him, place a stack of clean sheets, and take away what has been copied. He has aged greatly. His right hand trembles, and he no longer looks at the door when it opens. Once he asked me if they remember him above. I could have lied. I told the truth and left, and until the very top steps, I heard his quill scratching again in the dry silence.
Gilly is alive, and the boy is alive, and he is already reading, poorly, tracing the line with his finger, but he is reading. I see them twice a year, and it is the most honest thing in my life, and at the same time, the most bitter. Because every time I look at them across the table, I catch myself with the same thought. Did I write them to be this way? There is no way to check. That is the price I was made to pay. I will never again be able to simply love something without asking myself where it came from.
A Valyrian steel sword hangs above my door, in its scabbard, as dull as a stick, because I have never once sharpened it. My father was certain until his death that I would not be worthy of this steel. He was absolutely right, and I do not even argue. It just turned out that with a sword, one decides one fate at a time, but with what stands on my desk, all of them at once.
Sometimes, late at night, it occurs to me that there was no glass candle, that there was no black lower hall, no stranger's eyes, no names crossed out with a ruler, but only a fat boy who was beaten his whole life for books and who learned too well how to imagine what other people feel, that I invented it all, the man with the severed hand, the woman walking into the fire, and the girl counting coins on a strange street. Maybe that is how it is. It makes no difference. Both are called by one word, and that word is song. I dipped my quill into the inkwell and wrote the first line of the next chapter. The blot on the word dragon turned out, as always, fat, and I did not wipe it away. Behind my back, no one was standing anymore.
The Targaryens sat on the Iron Throne for 283 years. All this time there was a house in Westeros that ruled its city long before the first dragon ever laid eyes on the shores of this continent, and continued to rule it long after the last Targaryen lost the throne, House Hightower. And here is what is truly strange about this story. In all their monstrously long life, this lineage never once seriously reached for the crown of the Seven Kingdoms. Not a single rebellion for the throne, not a single claimant of their own, not a single attempt to don the crown, despite the fact that they are older than almost everyone, as rich as the Lannisters, and craftier than most of those you could name off the top of your head.
So here is the main question, the one worth staying until the end for. How did a house that barely played the Game of Thrones manage to outlive everyone who actually did?
We know the Hightowers from a narrow sliver of their history. From the House of the Dragon series, where Otto Hightower holds the position of hand for decades, and his daughter Alicent becomes queen and mother to the king. From Game of Thrones, where Samwell Tarly sails to Old Town to train as a maester and sees only the fire of the lighthouse above the fog. From the White Cloak of Sir Gerald Hightower, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, who died at the Tower of Joy guarding a secret that changed the entire saga. These are tiny fragments. Behind them lies a history thousands of years long, and hidden within it is a pattern that explains everything this house has done and everything it hasn't.
Let's start with the essence, because without it, nothing else will make sense.
Every great house has a trait that dictates its decisions across all generations. For the Starks, it is duty, which is always more precious than survival. For the Lannisters, it is legacy, for which one might burn anything. For the Greyjoys, it is freedom, which always turns into self-destruction. For the Hightowers, it is influence over power. They realized one thing very early on that other houses hadn't figured out in 8,000 years. If you own the place without which someone else's power cannot function, you don't need to be the power yourself.
Look at their sigil. A white stone tower with a fire at the top, on a smoky grey field. Not a predator, not a weapon, not a crown. All the great houses chose a beast or a force for their sigil. The Stark direwolf warns, the Lannister lion threatens, the Targaryen three-headed dragon promises destruction. The Hightowers chose a building, and a strictly utilitarian infrastructural building at that, useful to outsiders. The lighthouse doesn't exist to frighten anyone. It exists so that foreign ships can reach where they need to go.
Now, the motto, "We light the way." Listen to how unlike everything else in Westeros that is. Hear me roar, winter is coming, fire and blood, unbowed, unbent, unbroken. Every house screams its strength to the world, and only the Hightowers define themselves through service. We light the way. It sounds like modesty, almost like self-deprecation, but think for a second about what that means in practice. Whoever holds the lighthouse decides which ship enters the harbor and which one will wander in the fog of the whispering sound all night and shatter against the rocks. This isn't modesty. It is the quietest form of control one could possibly imagine.
And their castle is exactly the same. The High Tower stands on Battle Isle at the mouth of the Honey Wine, right in the center of Old Town. It is the tallest man-made structure in Westeros, taller than the wall, which stretches for 700 feet. The shadow of the tower cuts through the city like a sword, and for centuries the people of Old Town have told the time of day by that shadow. In other words, the life of the second largest city in the Seven Kingdoms is literally marked by the shadow of House Hightower. No one ever gave such an order. The tower simply stands, and the people beneath it live by its shadow.
And here is what all this leads to. Throughout their history, the Hightowers have built 3 levers, each more powerful than an army. The Citadel, where maesters are forged and then sent to every castle in Westeros, and without whom no lord knows how to heal, calculate, or send a letter. The Star's Sept, where for thousands of years before the conquest, the High Septon sat, that is, spiritual authority over the entire continent, and the port of Old Town, through which the money, goods, and ships of the entire South flowed. Knowledge, faith, and trade, 3 things without which no crown can hold. And all 3 sit at the Hightowers' home, on their land, with their money.
This is what this house is made of. Not swords, but institutions. And now, let's look at how this trait manifested over the millennia, because the pattern you are about to see explains both their incredible longevity and the one single generation that broke this pattern and paid a terrible price.
Let's start with where they even came from. And here is the first oddity, which should have alerted the reader back in the book appendices. Most great houses have a founder, a legend of how it all began. Len the Clever tricked his way into Casterly Rock. Brandon the Builder raised Winterfell and the Wall. Garth Greenhand grew the Reach.
the Hightowers have no such legend. When they first appear in the oldest records, they are already kings, already sitting in Old Town, already ruling.
Furthermore, no one really knows who they are by blood. Most scholars consider them descendants of the first men. But Maester Yandel in The World of Ice and Fire suggests something quite different, that the Hightowers descend from mariners and traders who settled at the mouth of the Whispering Sound before the first men. That is, from people who came to Westeros before those we are accustomed to calling the first. If Yandel is right, then the Hightowers aren't even truly Westerosi. They are older than the very concept of Westeros.
And they didn't live in a castle they built themselves. They settled in someone else's fortress. On Battle Isle stands an ancient square fortification of black stone, a labyrinth of grim halls, cellars, and passages. And this fortress was there before them. Who built it? No one knows. We will return to this stone toward the end because the most interesting thing in the entire history of the house is hidden there. But for now, remember a simple thing. The lineage of House Hightower begins with someone moving into a foreign structure of unknown origin and becoming a king within it.
Первую башню, которую они построили сами, была деревянной и возвышалась над крепостью примерно на 50 футов. Простой маяк для торговых судов, потому что туман в реке Шепота толстый, а гавань богата. Потом была вторая деревянная башня, повыше, потом третья, потом четвертая. И только легендарный король Утер из Хайтауэра оплатил постройку пятой, целиком из камня, которая возвышалась над гаванью на 200 футов. Проект, согласно легенде, спроектировал Брэндон-строитель сам или его сын. Отметим логику этого дома даже в мифе. Они не позвали строителя, чтобы построить крепость или стену. Они позвали лучшего строителя эпохи, чтобы сделать им большую лампу.
It was during the time of Uthor's sons that an event occurred, whose consequences Westeros is still dealing with today. King Uthor had two sons. The eldest, Urigon, inherited the crown. The younger, Prince Perimor, nicknamed the Twisted, spent almost his entire life bedridden. He couldn't fight, couldn't rule, couldn't even walk properly. And he occupied himself with the only thing he had left, gathering people around him who knew something. Teachers, healers, septons, singers, alchemists, sorcerers. He loved listening to scholars argue among themselves.
When Paramore died, his brother Jurgen gave this motley crew a piece of land on the banks of the Honeywine so they could settle and continue their arguments. Thus, the Citadel was born. Think about it, the greatest repository of knowledge in the known world, an order that supplies maesters to every castle from Dorne to the Wall, began as a hobby of a sick boy from House Hightower and a gift from his brother. This was not conquest or calculation, it was a byproduct of compassion. And it proved more powerful than any army Westeros ever assembled.
Then begins their golden age, and it looks nothing like the golden ages of other houses. For the Lannisters, the golden age is Tywin, who burned Castamere. For the Targaryens, it is the conquest. For the Hightowers, the golden age is trade. Lord Jeremy Hightower developed merchantry and doubled House's wealth. His son, Lord Jason, added another 100 feet to the tower. Lord Dorian, for the sake of trade stability, set aside his own wife and married an Andal princess, which by the standards of a proud ancient lineage is actually a humiliation. But money is more important than pride. Each generation added to the fortune, and not one added to the territory.
Jeremy Hightower is credited with a phrase that explains the entire house better than any analysis. The meaning is roughly this: Highgarden covers our back, so we are free to look outward, to the sea and the lands beyond it. There is your entire strategy in one sentence. Let someone else hold the border, fight the Dornish, and deal with rebellious bannermen. We will pay for that, while we look to the sea. No other great house in Westeros ever thought to admit out loud that having someone else's army in their service is more profitable than their own glory.
And here it is time to speak of the first crack, because it appeared exactly at the moment of their highest ascent. Old Town was a tempting prize. It was stormed and looted more than once, by the Ironborn, by the Dornish, and by the armies of the Gardeners, the kings of the Reach. Gyle Swan Gardener looted the city, but could never take the tower itself. And at some point, the Hightowers made a choice that defined their entire future. They didn't fight Highgarden to the bitter end. King Clymont, nicknamed the Sea Lion, the very one who broke the Ironborn invasion, married the daughter of Garland to Gardener, and Garland, for the sake of this, set aside his own wives and took Clymont's daughter as his wife.
Old Town entered the Kingdom of the Reach not through conquest, but through a marriage contract. Stop for a second and appreciate what happened. A house that had been royal for thousands of years voluntarily ceased to be royal. Lymond went to sleep as the king of the Hightower and woke up as the first lord of Old Town. He traded the crown for security and the right not to fight. For the Starks or the Greyjoys, this would have been the end of the world and eternal shame. For the Hightowers, it was a deal, and a profitable one at that. A crown is the duty to defend borders. A lord's title is the opportunity to count money while someone else defends the borders.
This is what they were at their peak. Wealthier than almost everyone, older than almost everyone, and yet they voluntarily stepped into secondary roles. And that is precisely why everything that follows becomes truly interesting. Because over the next millennia, the Hightowers would have to survive the coming of the Andals, a change of religion, dragonfire, and a mad king who would personally want their blood. And every time, they would wriggle out of it the same way.
The first serious test came from the east and was called the Coming of the Andals. People with iron weapons, 7-pointed stars carved into their chests, and a new religion that did not tolerate the old gods poured across the narrow sea. The kingdoms of the first men fell one after another. The Vale was conquered entirely. House Arryn literally grew on the bones of the former kings. The Riverlands drowned in blood. The North survived only because it stood far away and was cold.
But the Hightowers and the Gardeners did what almost no one else did. They did not fight the Andals. They negotiated with them and formed an alliance. As a result, the Reach kept its rulers, its lands, and its wealth, and the Andals got what they came for without decades of slaughter. Pay attention to this pattern because it will repeat many more times. When a force that cannot be stopped bangs on the door, the Hightowers do not lock it, they open it and offer to invest in a common cause.
But the true genius was not in the alliance. It was in what happened next. The Hightowers did not just adopt the new religion, they sheltered it. Lord Daemon, nicknamed the Pious, became one of the first great lords of Westeros to adopt the Faith of the Seven. His son, Lord Tristan, was raised by Septons and built the Starry Sept, and Tristan's son, Lord Barris, gifted the High Septon his first crystal crown. In other words, the very symbol of supreme spiritual authority in Westeros came out of the Hightower's pocket.
Now, put it all together. The Starry Sept became the seat of the High Septon thousands of years before the conquest. This means that the head of the entire continent's religion lived for millennia in the Hightowers' city, on Hightower land, under the shadow of their tower. No king could be crowned,
marry, or declare war without the blessing of a man who ate breakfast 2 steps from their doorstep. No army could enter Old Town without wondering what the faith would say about it. The Hightowers achieved a state where religion itself became their wall.
И заметьте, что нет ни одного столько насильственного шага здесь. Они не заваливали никого, не свергали никого, ничего не брали ни у кого. Они просто были достаточно щедры и достаточно дальновидны в нужный момент. Каждое поколение вкладывало в институцию, которая в то время еще не была всесильной. Молодая религия, странная компания скрипахинов на реке, купцы с Востока. С веками эти инвестиции превратились в силу, которую нельзя было осадить или взять мечом.
И тогда небо Вестероса наполнились драконами, и именно этот момент должен был положить конец их прекрасной стратегии. Эйгон Таргариен высадился в устье Черноводной. Его сестры сожгли Харренхалл вместе с Харреном Блэком и всем его родом. На поле пагубном сгорело 4000 человек, а с ними король Мэрон IX Гарднер, правитель Простора, и все его наследники. Род Гарднер, который правил Простором со времен Гарта Зеленорука, пресек свое существование в один день.
Lord Manfred Hightower did not go to the field of fire. Formally, he was obligated to. The Gardeners were his liege lords, he was their bannerman, and the summons was lawful. Instead, he stayed home and waited. And in the Starry Sept, at that time, the High Septon locked himself away and prayed for 7 days without food or water, so that the 7 would give him an answer. After 7 days, he emerged and announced, the faith would not oppose Aegon, because otherwise Old Town would burn along with the Starry Sept.
Let's be honest and call things by their names. The High Septon in this story did Manfred a huge favor, and that favor came exactly on time. The Hightowers received an impeccable religious justification for not fulfilling their duty to their liege. Not cowardice, not treason, but the will of the gods. And when Aegon flew to Old Town on Balerion, Manfred opened the gates. The city was not burned. Moreover, the High Septon anointed Aegon and recognized the right of House Targaryen to rule all 7 kingdoms.
Now assess the result of that one night. The Gardeners are dead, every last one of them. Highgarden was given to the Tyrells, who until then were merely stewards. The Kingdom of the Reach no longer exists. But the Hightowers kept their city, wealth, titles, fleet, and the Citadel, and on top of that, they gained a new liege who yesterday was handing towels to the Gardeners. Moreover, the very dating system of Westeros, all those years after the conquest, begins with a coronation that took place in their city, in their sept. A house that did not participate in the war ended up at the point from which the world begins to count time.
It is worth catching your breath here and noting one detail that is easy to miss. Manfred offered Aegon his youngest daughter as a wife. Aegon refused, so as not to offend his own sisters, but the fact itself is telling. Not even a day had passed since the opening of the gates, and the High Powers were already trying to weave their blood into the new dynasty, not by the sword, not by claim, but through the marriage bed. Remember this attempt. 100 years later, they will succeed, and the consequences will be monstrous.
Третья поворотная точка пришла быстро, и он почти стоил дому всего. Верховный Септон, который был дядей девушки по имени Сирис Хайтауэр, предложил ее в жены принцу Мейгару Таргериону, вместо того брака внутри семьи, на который настаивала королевская семья. Мейгар взял ее в жены. Сирис так и не родила детей. Через 14 лет Мейгар взял вторую жену, объявив первую бесплодной,
И именно тогда Хайтауры оказались в самом опасном положении за всю свою историю. Их дочь была публично унижена мужчиной, который вскоре станет самым жестоким Кинь в Сино в Вестеросе и будет летать на Балерионе.
Lord Manfred objected to the second marriage. Then the nightmare began. Maegor's war against the faith, the warrior's sons, dragonfire over the septs. And in the 43rd year after the conquest, the High Septon died under circumstances that no one could ever explain. The death was so timely for Maegor that suspicions flew in all directions. And among the suspects, Lady Patrice Hightower, the unmarried aunt of the then Lord, is named. There was never an official charge, but immediately after this death, Old Town opened to Maegor, and Morgan Hightower turned out to be the only warrior's son whom the king pardoned.
Put the picture together. The High Septon, an ally and relative of the house, gets in the king's way. The High Septon dies. The city immediately surrenders to the king without a fight. A relative of the house who is in the rebellious order is the only one to receive a pardon. Maybe it's a chain of coincidences. Or maybe House Hightower, once again, just happened to be on the winning side exactly a second before it became clear who had won. Westeros is full of houses that guess the winner. The Hightowers are the only ones who guessed every time.
And the final touch to this era which shows the limit of their flexibility. Maegor sent an order to Old Town, behead Princess Rhaella, a child, given to the Scepters for fostering, as punishment for her mother's escape. Lord Hightower refused. He didn't just refuse, he threw the messenger into the dungeon and announced his support for Prince Jaehaerys. This is the only moment where the calculating house goes against the king directly, and it happens when Maegor was already losing everything. Even their principles kick in at the mathematically correct second.
We have analyzed how this house spends centuries bypassing every catastrophe without ever seriously compromising itself. But all of this worked only as long as the Hightowers remained behind the throne. And then a generation was born that decided that standing behind the throne was no longer necessary. And that is when what almost destroyed them entirely began.
Otto Hightower was not the Lord of Old Town. That is the first thing one needs to understand about the story everyone watches in House of the Dragon. Otto was the younger brother of the Lord, meaning a man without an inheritance, without a castle, and without a future in his home city. The only path upward for such a man lay through the capital, and Otto walks that path to the end. He served as Hand of the King under Jaehaerys I, then under Viserys I, then under Aegon II. 3 kings. No other hand in the history of Westeros has endured such a thing.
Then something happened that the Hightowers had not allowed themselves for millennia. When Queen Aemma Arryn died, Otto's daughter Alicent married King Viserys and bore him 3 sons and a daughter. And at that moment, the entire centuries-old strategy of the house turned 180 degrees. The Hightowers were no longer the ones lighting the way for kings. They became royal blood. Alicent's eldest son, Aegon, was a Targaryen by his father and a Hightower by his mother. For the first time in history, the house had a chance to put one of their own on the Iron Throne.
Here the book and the series diverge most noticeably, and it is worth saying so directly. In Fire and Blood, Alicent's story is presented through contradictory sources, and she herself appears from the very beginning as a confident court figure, an adult woman who knows exactly what she is striving for. The series rewrote this in a different direction. There, Alicent is Rhaenyra's childhood friend, a girl whom her father uses as a tool, and her feud with Rhaenyra grows out of personal pain, not cold calculation. The famous scene with the dying Viserys' last words, which Alicent misunderstood, is entirely invented by the showrunners. In the book, there is no such misunderstanding.
The difference is fundamental. The book version makes the Hightowers predators who consciously went for the crown. The series version makes them a family dragged into the crown by one ambitious man, while everyone else paid the price. Which is more interesting from a dramatic standpoint, decide for yourselves. But notice that in both versions, the outcome is the same, and it is catastrophic.
Because next was the Dance of the Dragons. And here, the house that had not fought for thousands of years found itself in the very center of the war. Otto crowned his grandson. Alicent became the Dowager Queen under her king's son. Her brother, Gawain, commanded the city watch of King's Landing. Lord Ormond Hightower, Otto's nephew, led the Green Army from the Reach and, along the way, knighted Prince Daeron. For the first time in millennia, all the house's resources were thrown into a single military campaign. And look at how it ended for each of them. Otto and Gawain perished during the fall of King's Landing. Alicent was taken prisoner by Rhaenyra and spent the rest of her life effectively imprisoned, outliving all of her children. Ormond and his cousin Brynden, the finest knight in Old Town, died at the First Battle of Tumbleton at the hands of Roderick Dustin. Sir Hober Hightower, who took command after them, proved to be a wretched commander. He poisoned the turncoat off the White and perished in the process himself.
But the most devastating consequence usually escapes the viewers. 3 of the Hightowers' own bannermen, houses Costane, Mullendore, and Bisbury, fought for the Blacks, against their own liege lord. In thousands of years of cautious policy, the Hightowers had never lost a single vessel. Yet the moment they involved themselves in a dynastic war, their own banner fractured. That is the price of abandoning one strategy. The house that knew how to be useful to everyone became a party to a conflict for the first time, and instantly discovered that parties have enemies.
And for what? Aegon II held the throne for less than 3 years and died of poison. All of Alicent's children died. The throne went to Aegon III, Rhaenyra's son, that is, the opposing side. Dragons were practically extinct after this war. The only generation of Hightowers that reached for power lost more men in a few years than the entire lineage had lost in the previous few millennia, and they gained nothing.
Although no, they did gain something, and this detail is beautiful in its cynicism. Sir Talon Lannister, Master of Coin under Aegon II, sent a quarter of the royal treasury to be kept in the High Tower. While the Hightowers were losing sons on the battlefield, a quarter of the Seven Kingdoms' money quietly moved in their cellars. Even in a moment of total strategic failure, this house managed to remain a place where people deposit valuables. The instinct worked even where reason failed.
The 3rd season of The House of the Dragon, which was released in the summer of 2026, brought Ormond Hightower's arc to the forefront and turned him into a distinct political figure rather than just a name from the chronicles. Showing the War of the Greens without Old Town was impossible, and the series finally began to treat the house as an independent force with its own motivation, not reducible to a love for Aegon. How far this will deviate from Fire and Blood, the finale will show. But the very fact is telling. Even the writers eventually concluded that behind the Greens stands not just a dynasty, but a specific southern house with its own scores to settle.
We have analyzed the only instance where the Hightowers played the Game of Thrones by the general rules, and we saw how it ended. But the question for which everything was started remains. The house did survive after all. Moreover, by the events we know from the books and the series, it is rich again, strong again, and standing on the sidelines again. This means the lesson was learned. The question is, which one?
The lesson turned out to be simple.
and the first to learn it was Lionel Hightower, the son of the fallen Ormond. He didn't go to any capital. He stayed home and occupied himself with what the house does best, money and connections. And here is where one of the most underrated details in the entire saga appears. When the Rosary Bank collapsed, dragging half of King's Landing's finances down with it, Lady Samantha Tarley, Lionel's stepmother and later his lover, founded her own bank in Old Town, the Bank of Old Town.
Реализуйте, что это значит. К 3 ливерам, которые дом собирал тысячелетия, знание, вера и торговля, добавился 4 – кредит. Место, где хранятся деньги и где оно выдается. Это было после танца. Именно после того, как война свела на нет династические авантюры, Хайтауры вернулись к своей истинной стратегии и укрепили ее. Не корона, а инфраструктура. Не власть, а то, без чего власть не работает. Красная нить дома вновь заново затянулась после единственного разрыва.
From there, this logic works automatically, generation after generation. When the first Blackfire Rebellion split Westeros, the Hightowers didn't seriously support either side. They kept a foot in the Targaryen camp and the Blackfire camp simultaneously. For any other house, this would be a mark of shame for centuries. For the Hightowers, it is standard risk accounting. It doesn't matter who wins. It matters that the winner owes us.
But there was something else in their history, and it is worth mentioning because caution sometimes kills, too. During the Great Spring Sickness, Lord Quentin Hightower ordered Old Town to be locked tight, and for anyone attempting to leave, to be killed. The logic was ironclad. Stop the contagion at any cost. The sickness took half the city anyway. And on the very day Quentin finally rescinded the order, the surviving townspeople found him in the street with his young son and killed them both. The house that had managed people for thousands of years through convenience and utility behaved toward them as expendable material for the only time. And the people immediately presented the bill.
A quiet pause, because we're entering familiar territory. Imagine Old Town on a typical morning. The fog from the whispering sound is so thick that the city is invisible, and over this milk hangs only one thing, the orange glow of the lighthouse, looking like a murky moon. Ships head toward it, just as they have for thousands of years. Below the port roars, the bells of the Starry Sept ring, and gray robes shuffle through the courtyards of the citadel. Everything is the same as it was under Uthor, under Lymond, under Manfred. The world around them has burned dozens of times, but this routine has never changed.
Now to the era you know, Robert's Rebellion. The Targaryens are collapsing. The Mad King is burning people alive, and the North and the Vale are marching on the capital. What do the Hightowers do? They remain loyal to Aerys until the end. And this looks illogical only until you remember what their liege lords, the Tyrells, were doing at the time. Those same Tyrells spent the entire war standing outside Storm's End, doing nothing useful for either side. The Reach as a whole sat it out. The Hightowers sat it out with them, and when it was all over, they bent the knee to Robert and lost nothing.
But the war did take one person from this house, and he proved more important than all the others combined. Sir Gerald Hightower, nicknamed the White Bull, Lord Commander of the King's Guard, died at the Tower of Joy, defending Lyanna Stark and her child from Ned Stark and his men. A Hightower who died guarding the secret of Jon Snow's parentage, the secret around which the entire saga is built. Even in this episode, the house is true to itself. Their representative lays no claim to anything. He stands guard over someone else's secret. We light the way.
Есть еще доказательства, что стратегия работает. Лорд Лейтон Хайтауэр, известный как старик из Староместа, уже более 10 лет не спускался со своей башни. Он управляет вторым городом королевства из облаков, буквально не касаясь земли. Однако Тайвин Ланнистер, человеку, которому никто не отказывал, предлагал Лейтону своего сына Тириона в качестве мужа для своей дочери, и ему отказали. Подумайте сами, Хайтауэр отказал Тайвину Ланнистеру и не понес никаких последствий за это. Много ли вы знаете домов, которые могли себе такое позволить?
And now the most beautiful part. Leighton's second daughter, Allery Hightower, is married to Mace Tyrell, Lord of Highgarden. Their daughter is Marjorie, the very Marjorie who successively marries Renly Baratheon, Joffrey, and Tommen. That is, the granddaughter of Leighton Hightower finds herself one step away from the status of Queen of the Seven Kingdoms 3 times, and effectively becomes it. The Hightowers didn't make claims, didn't fight for the throne, didn't put forward a pretender. They simply married their daughter to a neighbor, and then the blood of the house made its own way to King's Landing.
И обратите внимание на контраст с танцем драконов. Когда Отто и Алисент прямой наводкой пробивались дорогой к трону, дом лишился почти всех мужчин своего поколения. Когда правнучка все того же дома стала королевой через 2 поколения браков, дом Хайтауэров не потратил ни одного солдата на это. Одна и та же цель, 2 разных метода. Первый обошелся им катастрофой, второй ничего не стоил. В этом, собственно, и весь секрет долголетия этого династии, сформулированный в одном примере.
Leighton has another daughter, the eldest, and exactly enough is known about her to be unsettling. Malora Hightower, nicknamed the Mad Maid. Rumors circulate about her being a sorceress and a dark practitioner. When Euron Greyjoy captured the Shield Islands and tried to blockade the mouth of the Honeywine, Leighton sent his sons on errands. Baelor is building ships, Gunthor is fortifying the harbor, Garth is preparing men, Humphrey is sailing to Lees to hire mercenaries, and the old man himself has locked himself at the top of the tower with Malora, and, if rumors are to be believed, is holding council with books of sorcery.
Linger on this image. For the first time in all the history known to us, the House of Hightower is genuinely threatened. And the head of the house responds to this not just with a fleet and money. He climbs to the very top of the tower, where the base of black stone guards who knows what, takes with him a daughter who is called a sorceress, and opens books that the citadel, standing 2 steps away, officially considers superstition. This is either senile madness or the most disturbing scene in all of A Feast for Crows.
And here it is necessary to speak directly about the series. In Game of Thrones, there are no Hightowers at all. Sam arrives in Old Town, walks through the Citadel, steals books, and the question of who owns this city never arises. No Leighton, no Malora, no siege by the Ironborn, no sense that a tower hangs over Sam in which something is happening. An entire plotline simply fell out. That is precisely why most viewers know the Hightowers only as Alicent's family and are genuinely surprised to learn that it is one of the most powerful houses in Westeros.
Who do you think is more important for the future of the saga, out of Leighton's 2 daughters? Ellery, whose daughter was queen 3 times, or Malora, who sits with books of sorcery at the top of the tower? Write in the comments, because this is a question that is currently splitting fans in 2. We have traced the path of this house from the first wooden lighthouses to Euron's siege. But behind the events and decisions lies something else, something that lies in the very foundation of their castle, literally.
Let's start with the tower itself, because it is the only castle in Westeros that is a mystery in its own right. The High Tower is the tallest man-made structure in the known world, taller than the wall, which rises 700 feet. Jon Snow, looking at the wall, thought about how the lighthouse of Old Town was taller. Casterly Rock is 3 times taller than both the wall and the high tower. But the rock is a cliff, not a construction. People built this tower with their hands, and no one else in this world has ever built anything like it.
The fire at its peak can change color. Usually it's a steady orange light for ships, but green flames mean the calling of the banners of House Hightower. In other words, the lighthouse also serves as an alert system for the entire reach. And here's a detail that is both funny and eerie. In House of the Dragon, the color of Alicent's faction was chosen as green precisely because the green fire of Old Town signifies the mustering of troops. The Greens are not named that by accident. It is literally the tower's signal.
Говорят, что с вышин башни видно стену. Это в контексте любого мира физически невозможно, но фраза перекочевывает из книги в книгу, и Мартин специально повторяет ее устами своих героев. Образ работает. В Вестеросе есть одна точка, из которой видно все. И тот мужчина, который сидит на этой точке, не спускался уже более 10 лет. Возможно, именно поэтому он и не спускается.
And now for the foundation. The reason all of this was told. Beneath the tower, on the cliffs of Battle Isle, stands a square fortress of black stone. Unfaced, without ornamentation, a labyrinth of grim halls, cellars, and passages. And here is the main thing about it. The massive walls and intricate interior rooms are made of solid stone, without a single seam, without mortar, without chisel marks, as if they weren't built, but cast in one piece.
Майстры-посвящанин Совет уже столетиями спорят об исходе этой крепости, и на этот счет есть 4 теории. Первая и наиболее популярная – это работа валерийцев, поскольку подобный бесшовный камень встречается и на дорогах валерийцев, и в черных стенах Волантиса. Майстер Джеллико берет это за основу и предполагает, что старый город начинался как торговая база для кораблей из Валерии, Старого Гиса и Летних островов еще до прибытия первых людей в Вестерос. Если это верно, то валерийцы были на этом континенте за 1000 лет до Иегона.
The second theory belongs to Septon Barth, the smartest man of Jaehaerys' era, and it is far more unsettling. Barth claimed that the Valyrians came to Westeros because their priests prophesied that the doom of humanity would come from the lands beyond the Narrow Sea. That is to say, the Valyrians didn't build this fortress for trade, but as an outpost against what lives on this continent. Considering that the others come from the north of this very continent, Barth's theory turns from an eccentricity into something very uncomfortable.
The third theory belongs to Archmaester Quillian, who believes the fortress was built by the Maze Makers, a mysterious people who left behind stone labyrinths on the islands of the Stepstones. And the fourth, the most chilling, Maester Theron suggested that the black stone was laid by the Deep Ones, creatures from the sea, and pointed to its resemblance to the sea stone chair of the Iron Islands, the very one the Greyjoys sit upon. And the small folk of Old Town don't bother with theories at all, saying the tower simply appeared.
Now add to this the name of the island, Battle Isle. It is called that in the oldest records that exist, and not a single chronicle, not a single song remembers what battle gave it its name. The singers of Westeros remember everything. They remember the long night. They remember the war between the first men and the children of the forest. They remember things from 8,000 years ago. But no one remembers the battle that gave the island in the center of the South's largest port its name. This is not forgetfulness. This is a hole that Martin dug consciously.
И здесь появляется деталь, которая до сих пор вызывает у меня мурашки по коже. Есть легенда, что драконы когда-то гнездились на Battle Isle, и что первый Хайтауэр положил этому конец.
Обратите внимание на формулировку. Не приручил драконов, не подружился с ними, не бежал от них, положил этому конец. Первое зафиксированное деяние этого дома еще до всех королей и всех маяков – это то, что они убрали драконов с той земли, на которой захотели жить.
Это теория, а не канон, и надо подавать ее именно так. Но вот и факт, который прекрасно вписывается в эту теорию. Мервин Мак, архимейстер цитадели и единственный мужчина в Ордене с валерийским звеном цепи за изучение магии, говорит Самуэлу Тарли в пире в Тервятник одну вещь, которая переворачивает всю сагу. Он спрашивает у Сэмуэла, кто он думает убил всех драконов в прошлый раз. И тут же сам отвечает себе. Миру, который строит цитадель, не нужна магия, пророчество или стеклянные свечи. И еще меньше ему нужны драконы.
Let's examine this theory fairly, from both sides. The arguments for it are serious. Marwyn is not some madman off the street. He is an archmaester and a specialist in magic, meaning he is a man who knows from the inside what the Order is doing. In the dungeons of the Citadel, it is rumored, the only surviving copy of an anonymous book is locked away, referred to as either Blood and Fire or The Death of Dragons. After the dance, the dragons grew stunted and died out within a single generation, despite the fact that maesters were constantly around them, and the last dragons were kept in the dragon pit under the supervision of learned men.
And finally, magic across the world fades precisely in the centuries when the Citadel gains power and returns exactly when 3X hatch in Essos. The arguments against are no less serious, and it would be fair to name them. Marwyn is the only one who claims this, and he is an outcast in the Citadel whom his colleagues consider a crank. The extinction of dragons has a boring explanation. They were locked in the dragon pit, they grew stunted in captivity, and it became increasingly difficult for them to breed. And most importantly, the Citadel is not the Hightowers. Maesters take vows, renounce their families and names, and are formally loyal to the Order, not to the Lord outside their window. The Hightowers hold the title of Defenders of the Citadel, but a defender is not an owner.
And here appears the bridge that makes the whole structure much more unpleasant. In A Dance with Dragons, Lady Barbary Dustin tells Theon about Maester Wallace Flowers, who served at Winterfell for Lord Rickard Stark. Wallace was a bastard, and his mother was a girl from House Hightower. And his father, it is rumored, was an archmaester of the Citadel. Barbary is certain that it was this maester who put southern ambitions into Rickard's head, the betrothal of Brandon to Catelyn Tully, the marriage of Lyanna to Robert Baratheon, all the politics that eventually led to the rebellion and the fall of the Targaryens.
Connect the dots. A Hightower half-breed, raised by the Citadel, ends up at the ear of a northern lord and gently turns the most ancient house of the north toward alliances that end in the destruction of the Dragon Dynasty. This is one specific figure, one whisper by the fireplace, no weapons. If even a portion of the maesters work this way, then the Citadel is not an order of scribes, but the most effective intelligence network in the history of the world, and it stands on land gifted by the Hightowers. How plausible is this? In my view, a fair assessment sounds like this. That the maesters had a hand in the death of the dragons is more likely than not. It is stated too directly through the mouth of a specialist. But the direct participation of House Hightower in this conspiracy remains a beautiful but unproven conjecture. Martin hasn't given us a single scene where a Hightower gives an order to a maester, but he has given us a huge number of coincidences, and his coincidences are rarely accidental.
There is a second theory that I find even more interesting. It states that the Hightowers have been guarding what lies at the foundation of their tower for thousands of years. Arguments for: they settled in the Black Fortress before they built anything of their own, and lived inside it for centuries. In the appendix to A Feast for Crows, it is explicitly stated that some Hightowers dabbled in alchemy and necromancy. Leighton hasn't come down in 10 years, and his daughter is called a sorceress. Against?
Every ancient house has rumors of witchcraft, and deep cellars exist under every castle in Westeros. For now, this is just a sum of hints.
It's time to draw a line. Here is my position, and I will not back down from it. The Hightowers didn't lose the Game of Thrones. They simply didn't play it. And that is precisely why they outlived all the participants. While the Targaryens were burning the continent, and the Lannisters were buying it out, the Hightowers were doing something that didn't occur to anyone else. They were becoming not a player, but the board without which the game cannot begin. Knowledge, faith, trade, money. 4 pillars, none of which can be taken by the sword, because you can take a castle with a sword, but you cannot take what everyone is used to getting from you.
And here it becomes clear why there is no beast on their sigil. A predator on a sigil means the house sees the world as a hunt. A tower with a fire means something completely different. We are not participating in your hunt, we are the place you will sail past. For thousands of years, Westeros has changed gods, dynasties, languages, and borders. The Gardeners burnt, the Targaryens fell twice, the Lannisters were left with an empty treasury. But Old Town stands as it always has, and the tower shines as it always has.
One time, they forgot their own rule. Atto reached the position of hand, Alicent bore a king, and for one generation, the house stopped lighting the way and decided to walk it themselves. The result is known. Atto and Wayne are dead. Ormond and Brynden are dead. Hobart is dead. Alicent outlived all her children in captivity, and the house's own bannerman fought against it. No enemy in millennia has dealt the Hightowers such damage as they dealt themselves by reaching for the throne just once.
And perhaps the most beautiful thing in this whole story is this. 2 generations after the dance, without a single soldier and without a single claim, the blood of the Hightowers still ended up in the royal bed. Ellery married Mace Tyrell, and her daughter, Margaery, stood at the very foot of the throne 3 times. What Otto achieved at the cost of the death of half his house, his descendants obtained through a simple marriage contract. This is their true weapon. Patience, with a planning horizon longer than a human life.
We light the way. For thousands of years, everyone read these words as a sign of the modesty of an ancient trading house. But a lighthouse does not serve ships. A lighthouse decides which ship reaches the harbor and which one will spend the whole night searching for the shore in the fog of the Whispering Sound. The Hightowers never laid claim to the Iron Throne. They didn't need to. The one who holds the light is not obligated to sit on the throne, because everyone who sits on it is sailing where he shines the light anyway. Write in the comments, what do you think? Are the Hightowers the wisest house in Westeros or the most calculating? And is there even a difference between the two? I'm curious to see which side the majority will take. And subscribe so you don't miss the next breakdown.